Okay, welcome members, and those that are in the room today are Trevor Lunn and Pádraig Delargy, and of course myself. And those members that are joining us through video conferencing facility this afternoon are Alex Easton, Emma Sheeran, John Stewart, Pat Sheehan. That's all so far. Okay. Can I advise you that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast through Parliament buildings and online. Members, you're very welcome to use your mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode. And if members are content, we will now proceed through the agenda. Item number 1, apologies. No apologies have been received so far. Are members aware of any apologies that I can record? No. So item number 2 is Chairman's business. I have a number of items under Chair's business. Firstly, can I update members on my meeting on Monday, the 22nd of November, with the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, where a number of constitutional issues were discussed. These were primarily related to issues in relation to the operation of the Ireland-Northern Ireland Protocol, representation of views and the needs of Northern Ireland in EU-related discussions and, of course, the democratic deficit. The Deputy Chair, John Stewart, joined me at the meeting. John, would you like to make any comments on this meeting?
No, Chair, not above and beyond what you've already said. I think it was very worthwhile. That they were definitely in listening mode, and I think they give us plenty of time to get across the points that we wanted to. As you can expect, in some of these matters, you and I didn't agree on everything, but I think we did it in a polite and understanding manner, and we got across our frustrations, I suppose, more than anything else about the situation that we're currently presented with. So,
thank you.
Thanks for that.
Okay, I have a raised hand from Alex Easton. You wanted to come in, Alex?
Chair, it was a slightly different topic. I don't know if you got my apologies for the last 2 weeks. It's just that I've been off ill with COVID, so I just wanted to apologise in case the message hadn't got through. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Alex, we were aware of your situation and hoping that you're recovered. You sound well. So hopefully you have recovered well and are fighting fit for another day.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, second item of business under Chair's business was members. The First and Deputy First Ministers yesterday announced the COVID task force would be reviewing the enforcement of the wearing of face masks and adherence to regulations. This is a significant responsibility, and this committee needs to be kept informed of the work of the COVID task force and as to what mitigations are being put in place to protect our communities, particularly in preventing the spread of the disease and preventing, of course, people from dying. And on that note, I suppose I can refer to item number 810 on the correspondence of page 122 of the meeting pack. And it was correspondence that was sent to us from the Committee for the Economy in relation to grants for ventilation of high-risk settings as a safeguard against COVID-19. This too is of primary importance, and we need to understand just what work exactly is being undertaken or being considered by the COVID task force. So if members are in agreement, can I write in the first sentence to the Department to ask for regular updates on the work of the COVID task force, but also to invite the chair of the COVID task force to come and brief this committee in relation to their remit around COVID communication and enforcement. Are members happy? Okay. Third item of Chair's business, can I refer members to item 8.12 on page 129 of the meeting pack, which is correspondence from the Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse, which makes proposals for the process of an apology. This is an important paper presented to the committee. Therefore, can I seek members' agreement to invite the Commissioner to present these proposals to the committee before the Christmas recess? Okay.
Yeah, very happy, Chair.
Thank you. And my final piece of Chair's business is one that I probably know all reps and members of this committee will be very acutely aware of, the levels of poverty and distress that we're seeing in our constituencies on a day-to-day basis. I don't think we can ignore the cost of living crisis that is unfolding in front of our very eyes and on our doorsteps. There's, there's a crisis in the cost of energy, fuel, heating, oil, all of that, and the real impacts that has on people's health and well-being. So this is a cross-cutting issue, multi-departmental. So I would propose and would seek your agreement that we write to the Executive Office and ask the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to consider the establishment of a task force to plan a programme of responses to help support these individuals in our communities, in our constituencies, through the worst of this winter period. Members happy? Okay, thank you. Okay, item number 3, draft minutes. Members, the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of November are at page 6013 of the meeting pack. If you're content that the minutes are a true reflection of the proceedings of the meeting, I will be happy to sign. Members in agreement? Okay. Number 4, matters arising. Members, while resources were not available last week to provide an official report of the Truth Recovery Design panel briefing, Hansard has confirmed that they're now preparing a report on that session. And Pádraig, thank you for raising that issue, and it's been done. Thank you. So item number 5, we have our first oral briefing. Can I refer members to pages 15 to 31 of the meeting pack for the relevant papers, and can I welcome Shauna McGean, the Northern Ireland Assembly EU Affairs Manager, to the Starleaf.
Thank you, Chair. So, Chair, if you're content, I will just give a run through of the paper that members should have in their pack, just pick out a few key points. I'm obviously very happy to take questions afterwards. So in the last sort of 4 to 6 weeks, there have obviously been ongoing talks between the UK and the EU on the protocol. On the 13th of October, the European Commission published 4 non-papers on a package of measures they said proposed further flexibilities in the area of food, plant, animal health, customs, medicines, and engagement with Northern Ireland stakeholders. And Chair, I know that the committee has had a paper from Research and Information Service with details on those papers, so I'll not go into too much detail here. After they published those papers, the EU, through Maros Šefčovič, invited the government to engage earnestly and intensively with the proposals. Speaking in Lisbon the day before the EU announcement, Lord Frost said there's a widespread feeling in the UK that the EU did try to use Northern Ireland to encourage UK political forces to reverse the referendum result, or at least to keep us closely aligned with the EU. And moreover, that was that the protocol represents a moment of EU overreach when the UK's negotiating hand was tied. Frost said he was sharing a new legal text of an amended protocol with the European Commission. And this, he said, takes into account the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which obviously had not been agreed at the time the protocol was signed. So just quickly on those non-papers, the first one covered engagement with Northern Ireland stakeholders and authorities, and proposed more engagement with Northern Ireland, including greater transparency on the Joint Consultative Working Group, greater input from experts, and greater transparency regarding the EU law, which would apply here under the protocol. It also mentioned a stronger link between the Assembly and the EU-UK Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, or PPA, and said that further contacts with Parliament colleagues would be needed to see how the ideas of a Northern Ireland substructure could work. That paper also proposed more structured dialogue with other stakeholders, for example, civic society, businesses and other authorities. There was a non-paper on customs, which essentially proposed an expansion of the goods at risk scheme and some simplified customs paperwork. Obviously, the ongoing issue of EU access to the UK IT systems came up in that paper as well. There was a paper on SPS issues, or sanitary and phytosanitary issues, where the Commission proposed what it called a bespoke solution, which would result in an approximately 80% reduction in checks, which should be required under the protocol when the protocol is fully implemented, that is. And also a non-paper on medicines. On medicines, Šefčovič said the EU has completely turned its rules upside down and inside out to find a solid solution to an outstanding challenge. The Commission said its proposal will secure long-term supply of medicines in Northern Ireland, including generic medicines, which is obviously a key issue that has been raised several times before. The EU said that cancer medications, for example, are approved by the European Medicines Agency, and should the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency approve the treatment faster, it will always be possible to bridge this short gap and supply and administer the medication concerned in Northern Ireland. They said they would have some special procedures around that. Vice President Šefčovič held roundtable discussions with Northern Ireland businesses and civic society on the 11th of November, and again he said that medicines was the #1 issue for local stakeholders and said that the EU would do whatever it took to address this in line with what the industry tells them. He said that the solution of medicines could be a blueprint for some of the other issues between the UK and the EU, and described an agreement on medicines as quite low-hanging fruit. Šefčovič and Frost met in London on the 12th of November to take stock of the ongoing negotiations, and Šefčovič said he welcomed the change in tone of discussions with Lord Frost. The government, in their statement following that meeting, said its preference remains to find a consensual way forward. Frost had spoken in the House of Lords around the issue of the protocol and triggering of Article 16, saying if Article 16 were to be used, we would set out our case with confidence and spell out why it was wholly consistent with our legal obligations. We would be ready to explain that case to any interested party, not just the signatories to the treaty, but to those with a broader interest in relations between the EU and the UK. He said again that in our view Article 16 is not inevitable, and he acknowledged that Article 16 is not what he called an on-off switch for the protocol. There are constraints on what can be done with the safeguard. That is why we find it so difficult to understand the volcanic reaction we get to the suggestion of using the safeguards provision. Speaking again more recently in the Lords on Article 16, he said, I would like to make our position on these negotiations on Article 16 100% clear. Whatever the messages to the contrary that the EU may think it has heard or read, our position has not changed from the one I set out on the 10th of November, or indeed in July at the time of the command paper. We would prefer to reach a negotiated settlement if we can, but I want to be clear, as a responsible minister, I would not recommend any outcome from the negotiations that I did not believe safeguarded political, economic or social stability in Northern Ireland. Speaking in the Dáil on the 18th of November, Simon Coveney discussed the EU's non-papers and the proposals. On customs, he said it is worth noting that the EU is willing to put into law what it claims it can do to reduce the checks burden. He said he thinks that would be very useful, and media reports have suggested the EU has indeed proposed a legal text to be formally adopted by the Joint Committee, which would reduce customs formalities and goods moving GB to NI, with green lanes being used at local ports. But on that issue of the percentage reduction, Lord Frost Lords that the famous 50% figure is actually 50% reduction in the number of fields in the customs declaration, with most of the significant ones still remaining. It is not a 50% elimination of the process. So EU sources do dispute that, and they said that they want to enshrine the percentage reduction in these checks in a joint committee decision which would have legal weight. So there have been other ongoing technical talks, obviously, since I supplied this paper to the members in advance of the meeting, and Lord Frost and Maros Šefčovič met in Brussels on the 19th of November. Again, welcoming progress on medicines, and the EU said this is a real test of political goodwill. They said there's been initial useful engagement at a technical level on customs, and these should be pursued. And on SPS, Šefčovič called on the UK to reciprocate the big move made by the EU. Lord Frost said that significant gaps remain across most issues, and on the key issue of medicines, he said there's been some progress, but an agreement has not been reached. He argued that a durable solution requires goods to be able to move essentially freely into Northern Ireland, when both sides agree they are remaining in Northern Ireland. He also had a piece in the Mail on Sunday calling for more urgency from the EU. And conversely, Maros Šefčovič was on Andrew Marr on BBC on Sunday, where he said, sometimes I feel in our meetings I am the only one pushing for urgent solutions. So the negotiators are due to meet in London on Friday. Speaking at the British-Irish Council in Cardiff on the 19th of November, Michael Gove, whose portfolio includes intergovernmental relations, said that Lord Frost has signalled that while of course it's always possible Article 16 may require to be invoked, we're confident that we'll be able to make progress without it. And the Trade Secretary Anne-Marie Trevelyan mentioned in the Telegraph that I don't think anyone's calling Article 16 before Christmas, absolutely not. Lord Frost also discussed the issue of a review of EU law that he has proposed. He was questioned on this in the House of Lords. He said he's launched 2 reviews. So there's going to be one review on the substance of EU law in the UK and another on its status. This relates to prior to EU exit, there was essentially a large copy and paste exercise of EU law onto the UK statute book. That's a category of what they call retained EU law. So this review concerns that category of law. In respect of Northern Ireland, he said it is the responsibility of departments to consult stakeholders in Northern Ireland as this review is ongoing and the content of EU law is mapped. On the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, so the specialised committees established by the TCA have begun to meet, and members will be aware there's a whole plethora of trade specialised committees and specialised committees under the TCA. So officials from the respective Northern Ireland executive departments have been attending those meetings. On the TCA itself, Lord Frost said the difficulties we're having in the protocol are at the heart of some of the broader mistrusts that exist in the process. But that said, the implementation of the TCA is going well. The specialised committees have largely met. The Trade Committee met earlier this week, and despite difficulties on issues such as fisheries, we are nonetheless implementing the TCA well and effectively, and the TCA processes are working well. So just one example, the Specialised Committee on SPS measures, which oversees that aspect of the TCA agreement, met in September for the first time, and they discussed issues around certification for animals and animal products, for import into GB, import procedures and conditions, and the state of play as regards border controls and certification requirements. Also on the TCA, the government has published a response to its consultation on how the government should engage with businesses and civil society on implementation of the TCA, and the government has also called for expressions of interest from membership of the mechanisms for engagement with civil society, the Domestic Advisory Group and the Civil Society Forum. So these fora will discuss the implementation of the TCA and can make recommendations to government. In respect of the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, which is established under the TCA, the European Parliament has endorsed its delegation to represent the UK on the PPA, and the list of the 35 delegates is included in the paper share. Westminster is still making its arrangements for the UK delegation to the PPA, but it is expected a decision will be forthcoming on that in a number of weeks. A cross-party group of members of the European Parliament wrote to Vice President Šefčovič on the 4th of October in respect of how Northern Ireland could be more involved in the work of the Joint Committee and the TCA Joint Partnership Council, and other suggestions about input MLAs may be able to have into the EU legislative process. And again, that letter is appended to the paper. Moving on to common frameworks. So common frameworks aim to ensure a common approach is taken across the UK in areas which are previously governed by EU law and which touch on devolved competence. And Neil O'Brien, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State, is taking over the role of responsibility for common frameworks, and common frameworks will now sit within the UK Government Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. The government published its framework analysis on the 9th of November, and essentially it sets out the details of each of the 152 policy areas where EU law intersects with devolved competence and where common frameworks may be needed. So this is the fourth analysis paper published by the government, and it updates the previous iteration, which was September 2020. There's details on each of the areas, the policy areas, and also gives rationale for areas where common frameworks aren't required. 120 of the policy areas don't require any common framework. 29 do require some kind of common framework, but it would be non-legislative common framework, for example, cooperation through memorandum of understanding. 3 areas where primary legislation will be introduced, and 2 areas where the government assesses are reserved but are subject to ongoing discussions with the devolved administrations. So in respect of the wider Common Frameworks process, there are 32 policy areas where Common Frameworks are required, and all of these policy areas apply to Northern Ireland. There'd been some ongoing work between the UK government and the devolved administrations in respect of cross-cutting issues relating to the internal market, the protocol and other international trade obligations and international relations. But those issues, I understand, have been resolved, and we are awaiting a final tranche of Common Frameworks to come to the Assembly Committees for scrutiny prior to Christmas. So just very briefly then, Chair, on to legislation relating to EU exit. The Subsidy Control Bill is awaiting a report stage in the House of Commons, and that's the means that the government is using to introduce a legislative framework for subsidy control, which ties in with the arrangements that are contained within Chapter 3 of the TCA agreement. Obviously, Northern Ireland has different rules regarding state aid because Article 10 of the protocol will apply to state aid rules for trade between Northern Ireland and the EU. The legislative consent memorandum for the Subsidy Control Bill hasn't yet been laid by the Minister. Professional Qualifications Bill, which is again around mutual recognition of qualifications, that bill is also passing through Parliament, and a legislative consent motion memorandum hasn't yet been laid. The Office of the Internal Market opened in the 21st of September, which calls on businesses to report any issues regarding trading across different parts of the UK. They've launched a new digital reporting service so that businesses can report any of these issues. And the idea is that the governments from the 4 parts of the UK can seek advice from the OIM on how the internal market is operating. It's worth noting that obviously anything to do with the protocol falls, anything to do with the effective operation of the internal market, but legislation and regulations applying under the protocol don't fall within the remit of the work of the OIM. On replacement EU funding, the Minister for Finance was asked about progress on the Shared Prosperity Fund, which will replace EU structural funding, and the Finance Department are analysing the outcome of the Community Renewal Fund, CRF, which is really a precursor to the Shared Prosperity Fund. And he said that they were working out how the money will be aligned with priorities, because obviously that money will be dispersed centrally and won't be aligned with any Northern Ireland or indeed devolved specific priorities. Another something to highlight, Chair, is that the European Parliament Committee on the Environment, Public Health and Food Safety was briefed last week by the European Commission on the proposals for medicines and SPS under the protocol. And the Director General of DG Sante, which is the Health Commission, Health Department in the Commission, she highlighted that the issue around medicines is also an issue for Cyprus, Malta and Ireland, which traditionally have depended on supplies from the UK. And she said that the EU's plans to revise its own legislation in respect of medicines shows its commitment and good faith. The Lords Subcommittee on the Protocol has also written to Lord Frost with a range of quite substantial questions around the potential impact on supply of medicines to Northern Ireland, and that letter is available on the House of Lords website. Writing to Lord Frost, the committee highlights the concerns of the pharmaceutical sector about the costs and operational impact of Brexit and the Protocol, the risks of withdrawal of medicines from Northern Ireland, the impact of grace periods and continued uncertainty in the absence of an agreed solution. It also raises some technical issues raised by the pharmaceutical sector, such as mutual recognition, and asks how the discussions with the European Commission are going to cover those issues. And just finally then, Chair, the first board meeting of the 3 commissions dealing with the Article 2 provisions was held on the 23rd of November. So that was the Equality Commission, the Human Rights Commission and the Irish Human Rights and Equality Commission, those 3 groups who are monitoring the Article 2 provisions. They held their meeting to plan the work of the 3 commissions on overseeing and reporting on equality and human rights issues with an all-Ireland dimension following Brexit. Those 3 commissions together met with Conor Burns, the Minister of State, and the Irish Minister for Foreign Affairs, Simon Coveney. So that's a very quick run through there, Chair. Happy to take any questions on the paper or indeed any other questions that members may have.
Okay, Shauna, thank you very, very much for that paper and briefing. It's very informative and succinct as well. I'm also aware, Shauna, of a letter that the Speaker received from the European Commission in relation to a letter he had sent regarding interparliamentary relationships with the EU and access to that. Can you give us a wee update on the content of that letter?
Yes, Chair. So, as is as usual, following the agreement on the motion in the Chamber around interparliamentary relations with the European Parliament, as is usual, the Speaker then wrote to the European Parliament and the President of the European Parliament, Mr. Sassoli, highlighting what the Assembly's agreement was in respect of that, in respect of the motion. And then Mr. Sassoli has now written back and said that while interinstitutional arrangements between the EU and Northern Ireland would obviously be a matter for the UK, he is aware that the EU delegation to the Parliamentary Partnership Assembly, which is established under the TCA agreement, that delegation would be very willing to and keen to have relationship with Northern Ireland politicians. So really that leaves open for discussions as to how that may happen directly with that delegation.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask, does the Deputy Chair have any questions for Shauna?
Thanks, Chair. No, I don't. I just want to pass on our thanks again to Shauna. I think it's really, really good information, very succinct, and a fantastic summary again of all the issues. You've had your work cut out constantly, undoubtedly, but I thank you for. There's nothing more than that I have to question at this stage, but I appreciate your work, Shauna, ongoing.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, Trevor, you have indicated that you would like to speak.
Yeah, Shauna, you still there? You've gone off the screen.
No, I'm still here.
Okay. We're still in the era of grace periods, which I think maybe come to an end at the end of December. Is there any indication of whether these will be the final grace periods, or will they be extended again? Because we're not going to get agreement before the end of December.
No, we're in the UK unilaterally extended some of those grace periods, so there isn't really an end in sight for some of those, Trevor. So they're very much tied up with the ongoing negotiations. So they're open-ended, really, I guess, on some of them. So the not so for medicines, but generally for trade and goods and things like that. The UK did introduce unilateral extensions to those. So depending on the outcomes of the negotiations, then we'll have a bit more clarity about if and when those grace periods are going to come to an end.
Did the EU, if I remember right, threaten action about that? What the UK did and then withdrew it in the interest of goodwill and cooperation?
Exactly that.
I hope it lasts for a while. That's what I wanted to ask you. Just one quick one. Forgive me if I'm being stupid. What is a non-paper?
I've already asked it before.
You're not the first person to ask me that, Trevor. So a non-paper it's just essentially a term for a paper that doesn't have any legal standing in terms of the procedures of the European Union. So it's put out there as an internal working document, sort of like a discussion document that's for internal use. That's probably the best way I could describe it. There's lots of legalese to how to describe it, but that's essentially what it means.
I'm really glad I asked you that question because it's been worrying me since I read the paper. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Well, Trevor, I've asked it before you, so you're all right. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Keep them coming.
I wonder what the opposite is of a non-paper.
Okay, so can I bring Diane Dodds into the spotlight, please, for a question?
Hi, Shauna, and thank you again, as always, for the work that you do on this and just the really broad understanding that you have of these issues. 2 or 3 things which I think are quite important. You referred to the Office of the Internal Market, and this is the internal market of the United Kingdom. For example, in the Subsidy Control Bill, my understanding is that there are no protections for Northern Ireland within the internal market because 1, it's a protocol issue, and 2, there is nothing in the Subsidy Control Bill which refers where we can refer things to the internal market, because all of that has been taken out of that. So, for example, you may not know this, but it might be something that the committee would be interested in actually ascertaining, because I think this is massively important. And for those of us who've done European politics, and state aid is the thing that comes up over and over again for companies. If there is unfair competition and companies in Northern Ireland feel aggrieved that, for example, maybe state aid is more favourable in the rest of the United Kingdom, is in GB than it is in Northern Ireland, which under the protocol means that we would be aligned to EU state aid rules. What redress would there be from companies in the Office of the Internal Market? Could they take case there? Could the Office of the Internal Market look at that case? Or does the fact that, for example, with the state aid and the subsidy control bill, because there are no specific protections for Northern Ireland within the protocol, within the bill, there is no protection for Northern Ireland companies? Or is that just all too complicated off the top of your head?
So, as you say, Diane, the Office of the Internal Market's remit doesn't include any legislation or impacts from the protocol. So it's very much focused, I guess, on what will be the outworkings of the subsidy control bill, which largely will apply to GB rather than Northern Ireland, albeit there is reference within the bill to Northern Ireland. But as you know, the subsidy control bill kind of envisages, that the UK will have two regimes, if you like, for subsidy control, with sort of GB under this new subsidy control regime and Northern Ireland having to abide by the rules of Article 10. As you also will know, in the command paper, the UK government was very much saying, look, Article 10 was drafted when the TCA hadn't been put together. There's a whole chapter in the TCA about the UK and the EU and how subsidy control regimes work in both parties. So as far as the UK government's concerned, Article 10 is essentially redundant now because it has been superseded by the arrangements in the TCA that the UK and the EU have agreed. So those discussions are obviously part of the negotiations that are ongoing at the minute. So I guess the question will be if those negotiations don't result in a change to Article 10 or a doing away with Article 10 or a significant revision of Article 10, and Northern Ireland is still having to abide by Article 10 as drafted versus GB companies who will be more closely aligned to the subsidy control regime, then that question very much becomes live in terms of what recourse to, say, the Competitions and Markets Authority, for example, would a Northern Ireland business have if they were concerned that a GB subsidy scheme was putting Northern Ireland firms at a competitive disadvantage. So I don't know the answer to that question in terms of is there somewhere for Northern Ireland firms to go. I guess they could probably still access the OIM if the issue was with a UK or a GB, subsidy control. The opposite, you would imagine, couldn't work. A GB firm couldn't go to the OIM if they had an issue with Northern Ireland firms having a competitive advantage under Article 10, because that would fall in under the protocol, and the OIM has no bearers underneath anything to do with the protocol. So there does need to be clarity about that. But as I say, it's part of the ongoing discussions. If the UK government achieves its aim of significant revision of Article 10 or doing away with Article 10 and more of a reliance on what's agreed in the TCA, then that becomes less of an issue, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. It's just that if they don't manage to do that, and I mean, let's be clear, I think the protocol is an unjust imposition on Northern Ireland. But if we're in a position where Article 10 exists, I think that maybe the committee might want to look at what do Northern Ireland firms do? Should there be a perceived or real or whatever it is case of competitive disadvantage for Northern Ireland firms under any new subsidy regime in Northern Ireland? Now, I suspect the Competition and Markets Authority will come back and say, but that would be down to case law and we'd need to see a case and etc., etc., etc. But surely good legislation should lead us to inbuild protections within it. So I suspect that that's something maybe the committee might want to come back to and look at in light of what's going on. Can I have 2 more questions, Chair? Because, as usual.
Sorry, Diane, the only thing that I would say is if there are points of clarification for Shauna in particular, but the officials are coming along now and they will probably be in a better position to answer questions on points of detail.
All right, okay. Because I was just wanting to know, did you know if there was any work on the cost of labelling to either GB or Northern Ireland firms?
And I suppose that's probably the officials' question.
No, that's fair enough.
And Diane, the issue that you've raised as well, I discussed this with Shauna yesterday because it is going to be a real issue that we all have to grapple with in the future, because there are conflicts there between the Article 10 and just where we all sit in it. But again, it's probably the officials, and Shauna has been very good to kind of state all the steps and the processes and what is actually happening. But if we want the detail on what we, as the Northern Ireland Executive, are actually doing to in any of the areas that we've discussed in relation to the UK-EU discussions, it's probably the officials that we need to talk to. If others are happy enough that we move to the officials now, or has anybody got... Emma, oh sorry, Emma, I see your hand up. Oh, and Pádraig as well, sorry. Quick questions from Emma.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Shauna, for the briefing, as always. Your knowledge of this issue and all its twists and turns never fails to amaze me. I just had a question around, I suppose there's been much talk in the media in recent weeks, and it looked very likely that the British government were going to trigger Article 16, and then it seems less likely, and there's still talk about it, and we don't know sort of what's going to happen, I suppose, and another twist and turn of us being at the mercy of the Tories in the north of Ireland and the whole Brexit process thus far. But there has been a significant increase in trade north to south. I think it's 61% increase from north to south and 47% from south to north. And I'm wondering, is that going to be threatened if they do trigger Article 16?
I mean, that's probably a question for somebody more knowledgeable than me, Emma, if I could put it that way. I mean, obviously trade flows and any sort of change in the political environment always has an impact on business. But that's more of a subjective judgment, I guess, that maybe a question for the officials or for the Department for Economy for an assessment of that. I'm not sure I would be much help in answering that question for you.
Very diplomatic. Thanks, Shauna.
Okay. Thank you very much, Shauna, for that. And again, I would echo what everybody said. That was a proper, thorough briefing and succinct at the same time. Just the type of briefings I like. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. So we'll move on to our next briefing, item number 6, and this is a briefing from the officials in relation to the EU as well. Members, can I refer you to pages 32 to 46 of the meeting pack and pages 40 to 44 in the table pack of relevant papers. And can I welcome to the meeting this afternoon Tom Reid, Deputy Secretary of International Relations and EU Exit, and Gail McKibben, Director of Operational Readiness, and Lindsay Moore, Director of European Division. And can I advise you that this session is not being recorded by Hansard, but a video of the meeting will be available on the committee webpage. And can I invite officials to brief members? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to come along today and update the committee on EU exit matters in the absence of junior ministers. You were provided with a written brief, and we'll provide a brief update on that today in advance of taking any questions. So the committee will be aware that the UK and EU respectively share proposals during October to address issues and challenges which have emerged since the end of the transition period. Subsequently, the negotiating teams have continued to engage in intensive discussions to assess the extent to which the gap between the respective proposals can be bridged. Now, we have yet to have sight of the UK proposals for a new arrangement to replace the protocol, which Lord Frost announced on the 12th of October and shared with the Commission at that point. But we understand they are based on the command paper published in July. We have, of course, had sight of the EU non-papers published in October. Our initial assessment of those is that the solution proposed both in the command paper and the EU non-papers may provide a basis for addressing some of the issues, but it's not entirely clear at this stage, given that both documents are quite limited in the technical information they provide, and so there's an ongoing need for further clarification through the current discussion process. In that context, we in TO and colleagues across departments have been engaging with counterparts in Cabinet Office, NIO and relevant lead Whitehall departments to identify some of the technical issues and those areas where further clarification is required. Relevant lead policy departments have, as part of that, also been engaging directly with their Whitehall counterparts. That's providing a further opportunity to highlight some of the questions, issues and evidence which we feel need to be fed into the UK-EU discussions. The committee will also be aware that the EU and UK government are continuing to engage with our stakeholders in the business community and civic society. Meetings also continue at ministerial and political level. Vice President Šefčovič met with the leaders of the main political parties in October, following the publication of the EU non-papers. Lord Frost also met with the leaders of the main political parties last week, whilst Vice President Šefčovič is due, as we understand, to brief the committee next week. In addition, the First Minister and Deputy First Minister met with Lord Frost and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland on the 26th of October and the 9th of November to receive an update on their ongoing discussions with the EU, during which they stressed the need for certainty as advocated by businesses and the importance of continuing to involve officials across the civil service in technical discussions aimed at developing solutions. Recent statements confirm that the UK government's position, as stated in the July command paper, remains that the conditions for triggering Article 16 have been met. Now, while UK ministers have indicated the preferred outcome from the current discussions is a negotiated settlement, the triggering of Article 16 in the event the discussions do not make progress remains an option which has not been ruled out. We are therefore monitoring the progress of discussions to understand what might be required in the event that we need to implement contingency planning arrangements. On the withdrawal agreement structures, there have been no meetings of the Joint Committee or the Specialised Committee since the committee was last briefed. The Joint Consultative Working Group has continued to meet monthly and last met on the 15th of November. The agenda included modalities of exchange of information, a stocktake of previous exchanges between the UK and EU since the previous meeting in October, and it also provided an opportunity to request clarification on that information. Meetings to support the implementation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement have continued. The majority of TCA specialised committees have now met, and relevant NICS departments engaged with their Whitehall counterparts in advance of those meetings. It is expected that a meeting of the Partnership Council, which provides a ministerial oversight of the TCA, will take place in December, although that's not confirmed at this stage. The TCA also includes provisions for engagement with civil society through the creation of a domestic advisory group and civil society forum in advising on the implementation of the agreement. In October, the UK government sought expressions of interest for appointment to both these groups, with a closing date for applications of the 15th of November. To help ensure local interests were directly represented on both those groups, NICS departments encourage external stakeholders to submit expressions of interest. Now, assessment of those applications received is still ongoing by Cabinet Office. While we don't yet have any information to share on which stakeholders will represent local interests, it is expected that the first meeting of the Domestic Advisory Group will take place in early December, with the meeting of the Civil Society Forum to take place early next year. Turning to common frameworks, Junior Minister Kearney attended a ministerial meeting on the 10th of November with the First Minister and representatives of the UK, Scottish and Welsh governments to discuss progress in the development of common frameworks. This meeting has cleared the path for the potential publication of the remaining common frameworks by the 9th of December and allows for the committee scrutiny process to begin. As you are aware, TEO is responsible for one framework only, covering equal treatment legislation. Following engagement between TEO officials and the UK government, the First Minister and Deputy First Minister are considering the reclassification of this framework as no framework required. Work on the dedicated mechanism also continues, led by TEO in liaison with the Equality Commission, the Human Rights Commission and the NIO. Regular meetings are in place to share information and to discuss developments that may come under the scope of Article 2 commitments. Within the NICS, we're building knowledge through a series of articles, such as linking to the recently published Social Change Initiative document, which is a practical guide for human rights and equality under the protocol, and further plans to build capability are in development. I hope this provides a helpful update on the EU exit matters, and very happy, Chair, to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Tom, for that update. What work has been done to calculate the loss of EU funding due to Brexit in comparison with the funding from the UK government that is intended to replace it?
Yeah, our colleagues in DOF have led a work stream on that. I mean, the committee will be familiar with the figures that were put out before. I think if I look very briefly, the Peace Plus programme, obviously that's been agreed, that's now approximately just under £1 billion sterling, which compares, it's effectively a doubling of the Peace programme on previous years. There have been issues around the replacement of EU funding generally. We've seen, obviously, a variety of funding, Levelling Up Fund, Community Renewal Fund, etc. But to date, those haven't come close to replacing the monies that were lost. Happy to go away and look at this in more detail, Chair, and pending reviews of ministers come back to you on that one.
Yeah, because I think it's really important for this committee to understand just what is, what is the deficit there in and around previous funding and existing funding or potential new funding coming up. We had the Shared Prosperity Fund, we had the Levelling Up Fund, and we really just don't know what piece we're actually missing and how much and value that is, and the impact that it's actually going to have in our communities. So it would be really helpful, Tom, if we could have an entire breakdown on all of that. Also, can I just ask, and this is nearly a little bit on to what Diane had been talking about earlier as well, what are the likely outcomes or where we are likely to go or end up with regard to a disagreement over state aid rules, and have you looked into this on behalf of the executive?
It's another area, Chair. We would probably have to come back. Our DFE colleagues are in the lead on state aid, but I think there's a point in the issues Diane was raising previously about divergence and the potential competitive implications of that. Mm-hmm. We have had ongoing discussions with the Office of the Internal Market regarding the role, and obviously there are limitations. They're not there to pick up issues in relation to protocol. I think the challenge for ourselves is where there are legislative changes, not only at EU level but at UK level, or regulatory changes, that there needs to be a process there that considers the implications of those on Northern Ireland and including non-competitiveness. Now, that's something we're actively pursuing with our Whitehall colleagues, but something we've also raised with the Office of the Internal Market, that where we have regulations made within Whitehall, it's important to look and consider the implications of those on any competitiveness.
And just a quick one, the Office of Internal Market as well. How well known and what communication do we partake in order to ensure that businesses are aware of that particular office?
Yeah, well, the Office of Internal Market themselves have had a fair amount of outreach trying to promote their activities. There's also been some engagement through DFE and ourselves. I'm not sure, Gail, if you're in a position to say anything more. I know this is an area you've just come to quite recently.
Yeah, I can do. Yes, DFE, this was an issue that we've been discussing with DFE, and they have put some of the guidance from the Office of the Internal Market onto Business Info website, which is the website that sort of businesses are used to using in relation to guidance recently in relation to COVID, etc. So the guidance has been put onto that website.
And can I suggest that maybe more communication with the elected representatives here, because quite frequently businesses will come to us in our role as representatives, and just the actual role of the Office of Internal Market, representatives need to be aware of it so that we can also signpost as well. So can I invite Deputy Chair into the spotlight, please?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, folks, for your presentation so far and your questions to the Chair. My first one has sort of been already asked by the Chair, and that was around state aid. I appreciate your saying that it's being dealt with by the Department of Finance, but it's maybe in terms of how it would be arbitrated, and if there was a dispute between the EU and the UK over those rules. If nothing changes under Article 16 in the current negotiations, is it your understanding that it would be the ECJ that would be the final arbitrator on whether the state aid rules here that were being used were a breach of the EU single market? Is that your understanding, or would there be a final appeal mechanism for either the Assembly or for a business or for wherever? How do you interpret that in the current state of play?
Okay, I'll qualify the answer, first of all, John, on the basis that I'm not a technical or legal expert on the area, but obviously if it's impacting on the internal market, or sorry, the EU single market, then it is the ECJ is the ultimate arbiter. But I'm happy to go away and engage with colleagues in DFE, and again, subject to ministers come back with a point of clarification on that.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Appreciate that. I do appreciate how complex an issue it is. It's just getting questions about it already myself, and
yes.
I'm not entirely sure. So I thought I would use the opportunity today to try and get that. But any answer you could get. Do you believe, are the current negotiations and ongoing negotiations about changes to the protocol, are they affecting the work that can be done in terms of bringing down EU legislation to the Assembly, given that so much legislation is going to have to be passed on to the Assembly if we're adopting new rules through that? And given the amount that's going to be coming down as a result of Brexit and the protocol, how many items of legislation are you expecting the Assembly to see, and what work is being prepared for the committees, etc., to take that on? Is there any understanding through TEO of that work?
Yeah, I'll turn to Gail shortly on the legislation work programme, but in terms of the current discussions, I don't think those necessarily impact significantly on the legislation work programme that could come forward. Even where they are, unless we're seeing a significant departure from the requirements in the protocol or the areas of legislation which do apply under the protocol, then I wouldn't personally see that change. But Gail, do you want to pick up a point on the wider legislation workstream?
Yeah, certainly. Thanks, Tom. So as far as we understand it at the moment, we don't see any impact in relation to the ongoing discussions that there is on the legislature programme. So as far as we are aware, on the secondary front, there's 46 statutory rules as being identified in required and post-transition period, and 37 statutory instruments. Now, those relate both to some of the overflow that we had from the operability exercise from the end of the transition period, and others are to do with obligations within the protocol. There obviously is primary legislation, which has already been mentioned in relation to the Subsidy Bill and the Professional Qualifications Bill, and those are currently with the Minister and Department for the Economy to look at in relation to the legislative consent motion.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have at this stage. Thanks very much, folks, for your presentation. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Can I bring Porrick in here?
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. It's just around dialogue. So I was wondering, would it be fair to say that the British proposals on dialogue with stakeholders and authorities in the North are much, I suppose, vaguer and more minimal than the latest EU paper? The EU's obviously put forward detailed frameworks, and the British have simply said that more account should be taken of the North, which isn't exactly a new contribution to the issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are different views, and it's criticism both the EU and the UK will make of each other's proposals, the extent to which there is detailed information there. In part, I think that reflects the fact that the respective proposals have been provided as a basis for discussion and engagement, rather than as a detailed solution that's worked out and put on the table almost as a take it or leave it basis. I think what I would say is both the UK and the EU are cognizant of the need for better dialogue and better engagement with Northern Ireland, and certainly it's a point both First Minister and Deputy First Minister have made repeatedly in their engagement with both with Vice President Shevkovich and with Lord Frost.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Can I bring Pat Sheehan into the spotlight, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to officials for coming in today. I just want to follow up on a question that was asked by the Chair around EU funding. And the Finance Minister said last week that we had lost £70 million of EU funding, and that had only been replaced by 12 millions from the Community Renewal Fund. So there's a net loss there of £58 million. Is that correct?
I think, Pat, I wouldn't be in a position to say here that that's absolutely correct, but it's certainly what the Finance Minister said, and I wouldn't challenge that in any shape or form. But as I've said, I'm more than happy to go to have a conversation with the OF colleagues and come back to the committee.
When could we get that information, Tom?
That's very much, Pat. I'll have to talk to the OF colleagues, and obviously ministers will have a view on that, and it'll be as soon as we can possibly provide that.
And while the Finance Minister stated that last week, it doesn't seem to have got a lot of traction. You know, that here in 1 year we've lost £58 million. I mean, the health service, the education system are all crying out for funding, and yet 58 million we've just lost it, and that's it. It's not being replaced. One wonders why it hasn't gained any traction. Do you want to comment on that?
I think there's been possibly a lack of appreciation or lack of understanding that the various funding packages were there that aren't currently available. There is still uncertainty, obviously, around the Shared Prosperity Fund and what that might or that might not deliver to Northern Ireland. One of the challenges which the Executive have identified and have raised is that previously a lot of that EU funding, it would have come to the Executive. It would have been used, obviously, by the Executive to fund certain priority areas and in line with the overall programme for government ambitions. Is that quite a lot of the replacement funding we're seeing, such as the Levelling Up Fund, the allocation of that is being done via Whitehall, obviously in some areas with consultation with the Executive, so that even where we do have replacement funding, that's not necessarily direct funding to the Executive themselves. Now, it has been raised by ministers, it has been raised by the Executive collectively with Whitehall.
Okay, thanks for that, but you can get us that other information anyway.
Absolutely, yeah.
And just moving on to manufacturing and business. Stephen Kelly, the CEO of Manufacturing NI, has said that 80% of manufacturers here in the north are protocol pragmatists. Now, these are the people who are dealing with the protocol every day of the week. And I'm just wondering, what's your view of how business views the protocol? Do you have that information or intelligence coming from the business community? Is the 80% of manufacturers who are protocol pragmatists, is that reflected across the rest of business in the north? Thanks.
I think, Pat, what you tend to find is that businesses which have a high degree of reliance on north-south supply chains or EU supply chains and are selling into the EU market, by and large, welcome the protocol. Larger businesses as well generally have responded reasonably well to the protocol and the new requirements. Businesses which have a heavier reliance on the GB market and supply chains have tended to struggle more and tend obviously to be less favourable in the protocol. But it is, unfortunately, it's a very political issue, but it's also a practical issue for businesses themselves. I think the general message we do get from businesses is that they want certainty. And that's from our own experience in advance or just following the end of the transition period. It was the levels of uncertainty as to the environment, the requirements for checks, etc., the mixed information were one of the biggest challenges that had to be dealt with in the first few weeks of January, particularly on the part of GB suppliers. And we were finding an awful lot of the problems in accessing supplies from GB were due to the lack of understanding on the part of GB businesses. as to what was needed to trade into Northern Ireland. And I think the Trader Support Service did some excellent work over January in reaching out and building knowledge and expertise. I don't know if that quite answers your question sufficiently.
Yeah, well, it answers it to a certain extent. I'm just wondering if you have any sort of data or percentages of businesses in general that are, in Stephen Kelly's terms, protocol pragmatists.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're effectively looking at a range of surveys there on the business community, and obviously manufacturing and NI is one of those. You do, I think, tend to see the same results in those surveys that I think what we have certainly seen across the full range of them as time has gone on, more businesses have adapted to the requirements of the protocol. That's not necessarily saying they welcome the additional requirements or paperwork, but they have adapted and they are trading in that environment.
Okay, thanks for that, Tom. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Pat. Can I bring Diane Dodds into the spotlight, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. Can I ask, take you back to the state aid issue? Again, has the Executive Office made representation to the appropriate department, to BES or whoever it is that's dealing with this particular trade issue around the subsidy control bill, the lack of protections for Northern Ireland and the lack of protections including in the bill, legal protections that mean that subsidy changes in GB would have to, and you would have to look at what would happen in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, we certainly have certainly more broadly, but including in relation to state aid, we have been engaging our Whitehall colleagues around the divergence issue and the potential implications that not only state aid, but other regulatory changes have in Northern Ireland and the unintended consequence of that. I think, frankly, that's probably the biggest challenge we have going forward, is managing that divergence and looking at how we ensure proper consideration is taken of the Northern Ireland implications, both in UK legislation and policy and regulatory changes, but also in EU policy and regulatory changes. And that's very much a focus of the work which we are taking forward at this minute in time.
And how is that work going to manifest itself? How are we going to measure how successful that is or isn't? I mean, I know that some of this is, I mean, for my part, this is the iniquity of the protocol. It's a constitutional outrage, but it's also an iniquitous imbalance in the UK's internal market, where we heard Lord Frost talk this week about the need to diverge, but yet Northern Ireland will be held to EU rules. And no matter what anybody and whatever the views are in this committee, we can't actually change the fact that this is our most important market, both for selling into and for bringing supplies from. So how are we going to measure how this is what you're doing in this issue? Because this is a massive issue. And should we not, and should those people who want to rigorously implement the protocol continue to go on with this, then I think there will be real competition issues for Northern Ireland firms and GB.
Yeah, I think without offering a view on the protocol, obviously.
No, and I wouldn't expect you to. I'm not, you can just listen to my view.
I will indeed. But we have a managing divergence workstream, which is now a key strand of the work we're taking forward through the interdepartmental steering group. I think the complexity of this is huge, because it almost applies potentially in every area of policy and legislation going forward. And I think what we are engaging with Whitehall colleagues around is to understand how we work better together in this. And it's not just, traditionally we would have had some teams in Whitehall which would have worked closely with their Northern Ireland counterparts and understood implications. But we're now at the point where actually that knowledge, that understanding and consideration of the impacts in Northern Ireland almost needs to be right down within individual teams across all departments in Whitehall. It's a highly complex piece of work, and I think the more we dive into it, the higher levels of complexity become with it, quite frankly. Gail, I don't know, is there anything you would like to add to that?
Not really, Tom, just to say that, as you have said, that we have started discussions with our Whitehall colleagues in relation to this and how those considerations can be mainstreamed into any policy considerations by Whitehall colleagues in relation to the policy being brought forward. But those discussions are at an initial stage.
Okay, a couple more questions, because I think that these are kind of practical issues that, pending the outcome of negotiations, that we'll still always have to look at. So one of the suggestions in the EU paper would indicate that some medicines could come to Northern Ireland, although we're unsure about new medicines coming to Northern Ireland. Some medicines could come to Northern Ireland, but they would have to be differently labelled than those same medicines in the rest of the United Kingdom. I suspect that should the protocol persist, and I hope it doesn't, but should it persist, that will be a growing problem across not just medicines and pharma, but across a range of sectors of the economy. Have we done any work to look at the cost in Northern Ireland and the cost to companies in GB, and whether GB companies are willing to bear that cost?
Yeah, I think on the medicines issue, that has been one of the areas that has been a topic of discussion in relation to the EU proposals and the practical implications of that, the cost implications. I think more widely, this has been an issue that has been raised and considered at various stages through the EU exit process since 2016.
Feels like it, Ron.
Yeah, I couldn't possibly comment, but yeah, but and we've seen Archie Norman. I think, and weeks are flowing into each other now at this stage, but I think it was last week, for example, in terms of Marks and Spencers and the cost implications of having to relabel products, to service into the Northern Ireland market. It's one of those areas that when we raise in terms of the current discussions, that in developing the final solutions, it's essential that the EU and UK talk to people, local businesses, suppliers into Northern Ireland, so we understand the practical implications and the cost implications of the solutions themselves. The real danger is that whilst both parties, I think, are approaching these talks with a goodwill and a focus on trying to find solutions that work, that without that engagement with local businesses and stakeholders, we end up with the type of unintended consequences which could make supply in Northern Ireland from GB commercially non-viable in certain circumstances.
Yeah, I spoke to a firm in Portadown firm actually the other week, and they're a logistics firm, and they were indicating that for them the cost of the protocol was 4 additional staff. Now, this is quite a big firm. 4 additional staff just to do customs declarations and customs management for intra-UK trade, with an additional almost 20% cost to their business. And that wasn't just about the cost of the people to manage customs, but that was the cost of lost driver hours who were left sitting waiting, because firms hadn't actually managed to get their end of the customs process finished. But one of the things that they expressed most clearly to me was that Northern Ireland is such a small part of the overall GB market. I think about 1.8% overall. So it's very, very tiny. That many of the firms that they would have lifted from and so on just now don't do it. Have we any sense of how many firms have just simply given up sending stuff to Northern Ireland?
It's an interesting one. We do have regular engagement with Trader Support Service. And I mean, if I go back to January, we did find there were quite a lot of GB-based suppliers were pulling out of supply in the Northern Ireland market because of concerns over costs, etc. The reach out with Trader Support Service to support those businesses did actually help an awful lot. and more recently there's been some engagement there looking at small suppliers in GB as well. I think what we tend to find is that where there's uncertainty as to what the requirements are and concern about the costs, businesses, the immediate reaction is, well, why service a small market such as Northern Ireland if we can service Scotland or Wales? But actually having mechanisms like a trader support service reaching out and support has helped turn that around in certain circumstances.
Have we any quantifiable data on that?
We certainly have some quantifiable. We do have quantifiable data on movements through TSS and the number of businesses now registered with TSS. I think the most recent figures I've seen, which are I think are start of November, have us just under 50,000 firms now in GB registered with TSS. That's up from, I think it was 30,000 at the start of January. So it's been quite a large increase in that, and that's still ongoing. That reflects a huge effort there was there to reach out through business organisations, seminars, webinars, and actually proactively in response to some businesses in Northern Ireland raising concerns, both with ministers and officials and departments, feeding that into TSS and TSS reaching out proactively to those businesses to help support them supply the Northern Ireland market.
Okay, and Finance are doing a piece of work on the issue of funding and how funding profiles, I think, rather than laws, changed is a better word, because as you said yourself, some of the money may not be replaced to the Northern Ireland Executive, which tended to take EU money and mainstream it for their own particular policy objectives. But some of that will go through the Community Renewal Fund and its successor, the Shared Prosperity Fund. So it's difficult, I'm presuming, at the moment. And the biggest issue is that we can actually say that in one area of funding, peace funding, that has actually doubled in the last So finally, Chair, and thank you to everybody for your forbearance of me and on this particular matter. I've spent a long time doing European stuff, so it still interests me intensely, really. In relation to funds that are administered directly, so Community Renewal and the Shared Prosperity Fund, we, as a Northern Ireland Executive, I'm presuming will be allowed to say this is a good or a bad idea that you're doing with this. But does that mean that the overall process and actually the democratic checks and how the fund is spent are in Westminster and not in Belfast?
At the risk of saying too much here, I think, Dan, that's probably probably a reasonable assumption. I think there's a challenge here, Dan, if we look at the last round of funding applications. Despite the executive's concerns, it was agreed that departments would not stand in the way, obviously, of Northern Ireland bids potentially being successful. Departments were offered the opportunity to comment on summaries of applications. I don't think we necessarily saw all applications that were relevant to Northern Ireland. So we were commenting summaries. What we certainly weren't doing, and I think if we go back to the old European programmes, whether it was structural funds or even competitive funds, there was an opportunity to inform the priorities and the framing of programmes to reflect your own. I think there's been limited opportunity both to set the strategic priorities, which determine the calls for bids, and obviously influence the, beyond comment and summaries, obviously influence the successful bids.
Are different departments in the executive carrying out their own process in relation to that, or is TEO coordinating that? Where can we go to get the information? On the Shared Prosperity and the Community Renewal Fund.
I think the point there is we work very close with DOF on these in terms of the applications that came in the summaries. That I think, and I might go to that would have been coordinated by DOF, but relevant departments would have an opportunity, obviously, to feed into that and offer views on the bids that were being submitted. I think the other challenge we have as well is that the applications, obviously, in many of the areas, departments in their ALBs couldn't apply for funding. The challenge is a lot of the functions that would sit at local government level in UK don't sit at local government level in Northern Ireland. Transport's a perfect example of that. You know, so even the structure of the funds doesn't necessarily, I think it's fair to say, reflect where responsibilities sit in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, no. I just thought that because the funds will cut across all departments, maybe TEO had a more central role in assessing how this was working and how we would go back to national government in relation to it. But you're saying you don't particularly have that role?
No, what I would say is DOF coordinates, but we do through the interdepartmental steering group, certainly at official level, we have very, very close working across departments on these issues.
But it is something you could come back to us on?
Again, yes, pending the views of ministers, obviously.
Okay, I'm going to have to move on. After the minute.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. The officials have just another 10 minutes left before they have to leave us. So can I put Emma Sheeran into the spotlight?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the briefing and answers thus far. I just had a question around equality legislation and the framework that's been brought forward on equal treatment legislation, supposedly because of sort of equal commitments from the EU and the British government. And obviously, Britain has a Single Equality Act, the North does not. We don't have a Bill of Rights yet, and that process is ongoing. And obviously we've had the speculation or the threats to the Human Rights Act from the Tories in recent weeks. So I suppose one of the big concerns coming out of Brexit, particularly for Irish citizens in the North, was that it was going to threaten the rights of citizens here. I wonder, are we at risk of blacksliding on rights?
My assessment, Emma, would be no under the Article 2, not necessarily, and obviously the assurances we've had over recent years on the protection of human rights. Beyond that, I'm not sure I can really say much more. Unless there's a point of clarification there.
No, I suppose I wanted your assessment. Obviously, we've got the principle of non-diminution, and you know where we end up here. We're unsure of where we're going, but I suppose given the speculation or the conversation that has been had by the British in terms of the Human Rights Act, it's a concern, and it's a concern on the ground, and I just wanted your assessment of that. But I appreciate what you're saying there. There'll be no explicit commitment to denial of rights or backsliding on rights.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Trevor, you want a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentations. No criticism of officials intended here whatsoever. I think you're doing a sterling job. But is there anything, we keep hearing about these discussions, they're ongoing, sometimes they're productive, sometimes they're edgy, tense, threatening. I mean, the whole gambit of reaction that's come out of these ongoing discussions. Is there anything you could point to, I'm not being facetious here, where you could say that Lord Frost and President Šefčovič have actually agreed about something, have reached across the table, shaken hands and said, yes, we'll bank that, let's move on to something else?
I think at the risk of being facetious, Trevor, what they have agreed on is the need to find solutions that work, and deliver the best possible outcome for Northern Ireland. They have agreed on that. I think they obviously have very, very different views on how the challenges should be addressed, but that focus on trying to find solutions and the need for solutions that work in the Northern Ireland context, I think, yes, they have agreed on that. It's just a difficult process of discussion now at this point to look at how do we deliver that, or how do both parties deliver that in a way that they're both happy with, that addresses the underlying concerns that each has, whether that's protection of the UK internal market and customs territory or protection of the EU single market.
I'm thinking of sort of practical issues. VAT and second-hand cars would come to mind, perhaps the movement of guide dogs, that kind of thing, tariffs, removal of checks. A lot of suggestions, a lot of indications that perhaps agreement has been reached, but it hasn't been formalised. That's why I asked the question. Is there anything, let's take guide dogs, for instance. Can they now be moved within the timescale that's necessary across from GB to Northern Ireland?
Yeah, my understanding is we have an agreement on guide dogs. I'm actually just trying to open something here very quickly, Trevor. We've had agreement on scrapie, we've had agreement on the movement of animals for shows between Northern Ireland and GB and back into Northern Ireland. So there have been a few areas. I think the VAT on second-hand cars, there was very strong indications prior to the current round of discussions that we were moving to a solution in that area as well.
Yeah, that must be 6 months ago. I'm
Yeah.
guessing, these things, I know that discussions and negotiations take time, but people do ask me sometimes what's going on here, or what can you point to that's been a success that we can hang our hat on. I really can't think of very much. It's just ongoing and ongoing.
Yeah. There's quite a few sort of small areas there, Trevor. I'm happy to pull together a sort of a factual overview of those where agreement has been reached.
Yeah, that would be brilliant. Thanks very much. Love to see it. Thank you.
And the final question, if we could put the spotlight on Alex, please.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. This really isn't very easy for you. There's some questions I've been trying to get answers for months and weeks, and I don't know if you would be able to help me try and get some context with some of these issues with the protocol and stuff. We're fully aware about the problems of getting some goods into Northern Ireland and stuff from the rest of the UK. Would you keep a list, or does the department keep a list of items that we're having problems getting into Northern Ireland? And I think of one issue at the moment is cat food. Tesco's is having huge problems getting cat food into Northern Ireland, and there's a shortage on their shelves. So do you actually keep a list of consumables that we're actually having problems getting into Northern Ireland because of the protocol? Is my first question. My second question, and I can't get an answer from anybody, but would you have the cost of how much trade has been lost between Northern Ireland and the rest of the United Kingdom because of the protocol? I have asked Assembly questions and asked different ministers, and I'm just not getting any answers. So I don't know, would you maybe be able to get us that information or be able to tell me more about that? So they're just two, they seem simple questions to ask, but I'm actually having problems getting answers to those.
Yeah, I mean, if you're happy, if I turn to the second question first. I think in terms of the loss of trade, one of the difficulties is that the actual current data on GB to NI trade is limited, and it reflects the fact that historically we just haven't had to collect detailed information at the level of how products are moving within the UK. Your tendency has been to look at more information on exports. The primary source of information that we have had historically has been the broad economic sales and export survey, which has, that's where we're understanding from businesses where their trade is going. Now, that's an annual survey. It's undertaken by NISRA in March of each year. So the 2022 survey, which will be this March, will be the first one really that could give us an indication of how trade's been affected. What we have been looking at is indicators such as HGV movements, what we see from that, I think in the latest information up until July, I think 2020 compared to July 2018, we've seen an 8% increase in HGV movements from Northern Ireland to GB, and a 5% increase in GB movements, movements from GB to Northern Ireland. So we're seeing more vehicles taking that crossing. The difficulty is we don't necessarily know what's on the back of those vehicles, so it's difficult to read too much into that, first of all. We did have an issue in January where there were reports of maybe up to 50% of the vehicles that were making the crossing were running empty. The last indications we have is that's down to about 12%, which would by and large be in line with the historic norm. So those figures would indicate trade's holding up relatively well. But the difficulty with it is, as I say, it's HGV movements. It's not telling us what's in the back of the vehicles. And it doesn't necessarily take into account the potential distortion in logistics movements. So, for example, previously Northern Ireland hauliers who would have used the land bridge to go across to the continent, and Irish hauliers as well, a lot of those have moved on to the direct shipping lines from Ireland into Europe. I think those have increased by about 93%. It's quite a phenomenal increase in those. No longer using the GB land bridge, and we think there's been some movement as well. Just simply reflecting the different frictions between Dublin Holyhead and Belfast Larne and Stranraer, that there's been some movement of Irish hauliers using the northern ports to go across to GB and similarly come back through GB down into Ireland. So I think we have to be cautious about what the figures may or may not tell us at this stage. The second part, in terms of shortages, there is work across departments. There is work across departments about where there may be particular issues, but some of that could be commercially sensitive itself. So there's, all I can say, Alex, is something we actively monitor is where there may be difficulties emerging and what that might then mean for any sort of response that would have to be made at some point.
Okay, so we probably need to wait till March next year to get a full picture of all these.
I think, yes, a fuller picture certainly of what's happening there. I mean, there's no doubt, I think evidence tells us, historic evidence tells us that where you introduce frictions, you do tend to see an impact on trade. We're not seeing that reflected in the volume of movements, but there may be other factors at play within that, and it could be disguising problems in certain sectors.
Okay, thank you very much. That was helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your briefing and for answering the questions of the committee today. And I realise that you are now on your way to another meeting. So we will have a short discussion now on actions to take forward. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Well, business is an skill and it always wants stability, and so I think that it comes back.
Diane, was it? Oh, right, sorry. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Well, that was quite interesting, and there's a number of actions probably required as a result of that discussion. So will we take the actions now going forward? I think the one thing that I'm really pleased about is that Pat and Diane and Alex and myself are all actually agreed on one thing, is that we don't have enough data. And there's big chunks of data actually missing in order for us to make any type of commentary in regards to some of the challenges and opportunities regarding business flows, the TSS, in relation to the impact of divergence and the common frameworks and state aid. So there's more we don't know than we actually do know. So those that are talking down the protocol are actually doing it in the absence of hard and fast evidence, and there's a dearth of that evidence right around, and that's been very much exposed through this briefing today. And the fact that the NISRA information is not going to be available until 2022 is pretty shocking in relation to trying to get a fuller picture. Also, we do require urgent information in relation to EU funding. And what are the deficits there? And I am quite concerned about the Levelling Up programme in the context of input of the Northern Ireland Executive and how we can be influencing, our priority key areas within the strategy for Northern Ireland, within a draft programme for government, or even within our COVID recovery plan, how we actually make sure that money goes to the appropriate places, because we don't even actually have an input into that as well. So there's another democratic deficit that has been placed upon us by the UK government, which is quite remarkable in its own point as well. The officials indicated that in relation to the policy considerations regarding the state aid, etc., that they are in initial conversations and discussions with Whitehall. There needs to be a sense of urgency around that, because this is actually happening and it's going to occur. So I wonder, would it be helpful for this committee to write to the Secretary of State and to Whitehall officials to engage in those discussions with a sense of urgency, because there are particular issues that affect Northern Ireland as a result of the protocol that is here. And I suppose we've already asked officials regarding that a full breakdown of the EU funding and the information. And as Pat Sheehan indicated, what we know already from the Department of Finance and from the Minister was, that £58 million loss. Can we quantify it and see where the other areas of funding are coming from to build that up? I know the Shared Prosperity Fund, we're actually not aware of the details of that and what is going to come to the devolved administrations, and that needs to be clarified as well. Are there any other areas that committee members would like us to any other departments we should write to, or any other areas that we should raise now in relation to that briefing? A couple of things that we do know, which is quite interesting as well, that we have learned. We do know that there's $200 million investment in a new packaging plant in Coors Corner. And they have said that that is a result of our unique trading position. We do know that there's 120 new jobs from an Australian company, Tribe Technology, and again they've listed that the protocol has helped secure that investment. We do know that Northern Ireland's has the lowest inflation rate across the devolved administrations in the United Kingdom, and it's because of our particular circumstances and of the UK leaving the EU and the protocol. We do know that local producers are supplying more to stores for the first time. We do know that there has been a 17% growth in manufacturing jobs, which is quite remarkable. We do know also, unfortunately, that we have had 12,000 fewer non-UK applications.
Do we really need this party political broadcast?
But those are the things that we do know, Diane, and we need to actually talk about the things that we do know.
You are here to chair the meeting. You are not here to give your view.
Diane, we have to talk about things that we do know as well, okay? And I said it was important that we don't talk across members when we have witnesses here, but it's important that we as a committee talk about things that we do know and seek information in areas that we don't know as well.
Chair.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right to talk up the good news once in a while.
Yeah.
Fair play.
And I think it's really important to do that. We have all constituents that we serve. We have all people in businesses here, and they need to hear just some of the good points in relation to how Northern Ireland is competing in the global economy.
Chair, just on that.
So, excuse me, sorry, Emma, have you got your hand?
I'm not sure. I wasn't sure if you could hear me there or not, but it was just in relation to that bizarre comment from the member for Upper Bann. You didn't give a view. You stated facts and things that have arisen as benefits. Even just today, we've got news coming out that our continental market in Belfast is able to proceed uninhibited as a result of the protocol, which hasn't been able to happen in cities across the UK. So I think in terms of a party political broadcast or giving views on Brexit, there are things that are based in fact, and the statements that you just listed are facts. So I think that was uncalled for from Diane, and I'm not sure how appropriate it was.
Okay.
Chair, can I make? Chair?
Yes, go ahead,
Sorry.
Diane.
Sorry, I'm not on screen. Sorry, I apologise, I'm not on screen. First of all, I didn't mean any offence. It's not my nature. But, you know, sometimes we just need to chair the meeting. And that is also important as well. So, thank you. Let's move on.
Sorry, Diane, can I respond to you? Okay, I am chairing the meeting, but it's important. We have a scrutiny rule here for the Executive Office. We have a scrutiny rule in order to ensure that we help support, make government work here. And my observations are based on facts. And I think that it's appropriate when we are talking about EU matters and getting a briefing from the officials within the department to actually state some of those facts as well. And I believe as my role as chair, I am totally within my rights to do that. And I haven't stepped out of line in any shape, form or fashion. Okay, I think I'm showing a bit of leadership here. Thank you. Can we move on now to the next item of business, which is a very important item of business that we have to deal with. And it's item number 7. And it's Mother and Babies Homes, Birth Mothers and Their Children for Justice in Northern Ireland and the Truth and Recovery Northern Ireland. It's an oral briefing. If I can refer members to pages 27 to 38 of the table pack of the relevant papers. And can I welcome to the meeting today, right, I'm just checking who's actually on, Ewan Duffy, Member of Truth and Recovery, and Paul McClary, Member of Truth and Recovery NI. And we have Adele Johnson, Member of Birth Mothers and Their Children for Justice NI, and Una McAleer, Member for Birth Mothers and Their Children for Justice NI. Can I advise members that this session and those briefings, that this session is not being recorded by Hansard, and the video of the meeting will be available on the committee website. And just for your information, for members' information, the reason it's not been Hansarded today is because of the other commitments of the committees in relation to legislation. But we may ask again or request a retrospective Hansarding. But before we start the briefing this afternoon, can I thank first of all everyone for coming along to give witness to the committee today, and for being so accommodating and coming along at very early notice. I think it's after our briefing last week from the panel members and the authors of the report and recommendations into the Mother and Baby Institution, the Magdalen Laundries and the workhouses in Northern Ireland. I think it is so important that the voice of the victims and survivors are heard, that the mothers and the babies are heard right at the heart of this committee today. This committee was unanimous in their support of all of the 5 recommendations that were contained in the report, and indeed the further 84 sub-recommendations that were made. I have recently met with victims and survivors and all of you that are meeting us here today, and I have indicated my commitment to ensuring that as a committee we will do all that we can to emphasise the urgency for the Executive Office to put in place the proper departmental structures, processes, resources that they can put in place as soon as physically possible, because we need to get to the truth, we need to get justice, and we need to get accountability, and we need to have it delivered expediently. So again, thank you so much for coming today, and we look forward to hearing your witness to the committee. Thank you. So who would like to start off and give us a briefing?
Yeah,
Ewan?
I can start, Christine, if that's okay.
Yes,
It's Ewan Duffy
Ewan.
here.
Yes, Ewan, you're very welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Thank you.
That's good. You have to bear with me. My printer broke out halfway through printing out my presentation, so I'll have to do it on the screen here. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm a member of Truth Recovery NI, and the group was born out of the Truth Recovery process that started back in January this year. We are here, or we've been born out of the fact that we want to ensure that the full recommendations of the Truth Recovery report are implemented in as fully a possible way and as quickly as it possibly can as well. Would like to thank we're a group, by the way, of adopted people, fostered, boarded out, mothers and relatives of people that are all basically affected by the wide ranging and complex issues of the institutional abuses and crimes that were suffered and still ongoing. Would like to thank the Executive Committee for agreeing to listen to and hear the voices of victims and survivors as we do best to advocate on their behalf. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That's Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, 1948. That dignity and those rights shall be entitled in life and death. Too late for some, ignored and flouted by too many of power and influence to this day. 2017, just to give you some context, in the Republic of Ireland in November 2016, the Human Rights Commissioner for the Council of Europe made findings and recommendations based on previous investigations into institutional crimes and abuses in the Republic of Ireland. Some of those stated, while the exploration of the historical context is necessary to understand what happened, it should never be used to downplay, justify or condone the said human rights abuses. The accountability of the state authorities and or of the religious institutions has not been fully accepted, if at all. The redress schemes established are not inclusive enough, notably due to a narrow interpretation of the category of persons who qualify for compensation. The Commissioner draws the Irish authorities' attention to the UN basic principles and guidelines on the right to remedy and reparation for victims of gross violations of international human rights law and serious violations of international humanitarian law, and the 2011 Council of Europe guidelines of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe on eradicating impunity for serious human rights violations. As for the remedy mechanisms, they should be widely publicised. Time limits for applying should be reasonable so as to leave enough time to become aware of the abuse, overcome psychological and practical barriers, and alleged victims should receive psychological, legal and financial support during their time their claim is being processed. That's just part of his recommendations. He also went on to say that in the field of accountability, the Commissioner stresses that effective prosecutions and sanctions are necessary to remove any feeling of impunity and avoid repetition. So, rewind 2013, Northern Ireland Government scoping exercises into the Northern Ireland Magdalen laundries incorporated into the same scoping exercises for mother and baby institutions in 2014. A report by Dr. Sean Lucy in 2014 concluded in less but still substantive detail that investigation into various crimes and abuses were recommended. He laid out 5 potential investigative processes, absolutely identical to those that we were given in January of this year. That was just 7 years later. In February 2016, the Northern Ireland Government announced scoping exercises into the exact same institutions. We still don't know what they were, nor their outcomes. I sent in an FOI for disclosure of these scoping exercises in March this year to the Executive Office. I've still had no response.
The Northern Ireland Government was economical with truth and transparency in 2016, when it did not mention scoping exercises of 3 years earlier. The first chair of the Interdepartmental Working Group never met with victim survivors, despite 14 months of tenure. It took over 15 months to appoint a new chair. It took 18 months to announce the government commissioned research. The Northern Ireland research itself took almost 18 months to publish, since it handed in to the government. Excuses ran from no executive summary being required nor handed in by the researchers, legal deliberations, transfer of Department of Health resources and staff, and the maximalisation process of so-called natural justice to those under charge was instigated, incredibly, 1 year after the research was delivered. Point is, time is the enemy here. Too much delay, prevarication, procrastination, dismiss and disdain has compounded and prolonged the suffering. Many are deceased, including the perpetrators. Many are lost, missing. The many enforced disappeared that are not conflict related. The trafficked persons seemingly recorded as dead. Death and burial records are laced with huge anomalies and discrepancies in records that we have access to. At the former Good Shepherd Convent in Newry that integrated a mother and baby unit, Magdalen Laundry and Refuge Hostel from 1945 to 84, testimonies of mothers tell us of no-go areas, baby deaths and graves marked by painted stones. There are no sign of these now. In 2016, the Newry Reporter newspaper wrote an article about our site concerns. One man anonymously rang in the following day saying that he was an apprentice joiner back in the 1960s in the Newry area. He and others were given the job with a wooden template to make hundreds of baby coffins that were sent up to Marianvale Mother and Baby Institution in Newry. We don't know what happened to those. Why would Marianvale and Newry be different to those institutional sites of the Republic? The horrors of Tuam, Bessborough, Sean Ross Abbey, etc. Baby and children infant mortality rates were disproportionate to the general public and those born within wedlock. St Joseph's Baby Institution had recorded deaths in 1926, 27 and 28 of more than 1 in 2 babies that died. Dying babies were sent to workhouses and they died within minutes of arrival. I have a report by the GP that visited Connie Warren Children's Home in the 1940s, and he remarked that 2 young, emaciated children around 7 and 8 years of age looked like Belsen inmates, referencing the concentration camp. He wrote to the NSPCC about this, and they did nothing. The nursed out babies were often of similar fate in a system facilitated by the NSPCC, the cruelty man, as it's better known. A niche in the market and a market in the niche was grasped by the institutions and their alliances, when instead of letting babies starve to death, prospective adopters around the world knew that this island, north and south, was the go-to place to secure a baby, using eugenics, as wealthy and desperate couples, including the famous, could come to these shores and know that the system could bypass any existing laws. Saleable market goods, commodities that fill the system of capitalist supply and demand. The existing cemetery records at Marianvale show no grave records, no grave memorials, pre-1985, despite women passing this cemetery every day as they were forced marched to the chapel. In 2017, a farcical and token sham investigation for human remains by a so-called archaeologist and a colleague she commissioned revealed no sign of unmarked graves or remains. No scientific technology was employed, as manual hand digging of no more than 40 centimetres proved that there was nothing to see. Plan and development on the lands formerly owned by the Good Shepherd sisters have taken place despite justifiable concerns and objections that were interjected by paramilitary death threats that were ignored by victims and survivors. And the PSNI also dragged their feet on complaint. The police ombudsman also. Nothing to see here, apparently. I have death certs for babies that died at Marianvale and Newry, but their resting place cannot be identified, and they are not recorded in the parish nor cemetery records. The latest development, my Maxwell service station, was passed with minimal archaeological caveat to any pre-works in 2019. We demand that, as in the Republic of Ireland, lands of all current and former institutions immediately be identified and protected until forensic investigations are carried out to establish no evidence of improper and undignified burials. Local councils should possibly undertake this important work. Milltown Cemetery in Belfast has its own area with many questionable and unidentified burials. The personal testimony states babies, consecrated and not, from mother and baby institutions, etc., were tossed into the bog swamp like artificial dolls, now lay in their multitudes alongside discarded adults. 11,000 bodies is the underestimate that are situated without marked memorials. Mass graves are not investigated. Private cemetery status needs to be legislatively abolished, as it's a licence to inter at will, with no responsibility nor recourse, as it prevails in its unacceptability. No dignity, no humanity, no rights to proper burial. The Catholic Church sold this part of the bogland back in 2000 to the Ulster Wildlife Trust, knowing what was contained therein. The Trust soon returned it, given the controversy. It was dismissed by the Roman Catholic Church as an administrative error. Bear in mind, discovery and identification of human remains is also part of the elimination process in establishing the fate of the missing and the disappeared. The Northern Ireland research of January this year, as published, found no evidence of drug and vaccine trials that were so prominent in the Republic of Ireland. I requested information about myself of GlaxoSmithKline, the pharmaceutical company, who commissioned most, if not all, trials, north and south, from the 1930s onwards. They told me it was unlikely I was subjected to vaccine trials because, although they occurred, they were not published. Draw your own conclusions. I have evidence that some trials, quadruple and quintuple polio trials, occurred here between 1965 and 1967. These issues cannot wait for a statutory inquiry. They have impacted health. We know that many of us were tested after our birth for syphilis, as our mothers were when they were admitted. Some of us are involved in a current government initiative to review social policy and procedures with the very unfit adoption system that is outdated and detrimental to the varying health aspects of all of us, blighted by unacceptable postcode lottery and serious inconsistency of practice, highlighted by systemic misapplication of GDPR rules and regulations. This is another complex, ongoing battle that has huge and immeasurable ramifications for access to information, but as it stands, it is non-statutory. We need the Northern Ireland Government and its legal eagles to assimilate our findings ASAP, preferably in the hope within the Adoption and Children's Bill. Access to relevant personal and institutional administrative information held by the state, the religious and the charitable, the private and the secular bodies is a prerequisite for the long denied and rightful persons affected, but also for the state investigation to ensure best and fullest cooperation of testimony. We will not accept the past ongoing debacle and re-traumatising inhumane methodology and mindset of the HIA, the Commission of Investigation into Mother and Baby Homes in the Republic, the Ryan Commission, nor the Magdalen farcical investigations. Lessons learned, and we hope that the Northern Ireland Government takes note. Testimony is frequently the basis for reality and truth-telling, as it often conflicts with the official record. We demand credibility, authority, agency and believability. Our evidence is not as damned by the Commission's report in the South as contaminated or conspiratorial. We don't need it to be, because it is enshrined and reinforced by truth, and no partial configuration of that truth. We can fill the Assembly chamber with reams of scientifically and medically researched evidence that emboldens and corroborates our undeniable complex traumas and multiple health consequences perpetually suffered from early life separation, the unthinkable and the inseverances that created irreparable grief, loss, abandonment, disassociation, personality disorders, propensities for addictions, and self-harm to suicide, and much more as suffered by mother and child that impacts transgenerationally, often not resolved by reunion. Such is the damage. We will not be downtrodden and denigrated by dismissal of in utero, perinatal, postnatal stresses and harms. No repeat of the ROI redress insult will darken these legislative doors. Anatomical body bequests for research and teaching by the Queen's University Belfast is another of the many ongoing issues where we are trying to ascertain if and whether informed consent and knowledge was requested and given for deceased bodies to be used for various anatomical purposes. This is potentially another huge scandal. I have data on over 1,100 bodies taken or acquired by the workhouse institutions and one notable mother and baby institution run by the Salvation Army in Belfast. Disposal of these remains and after use of these remains are under question, as the Queen's University in Belfast have drip-fed me data for the last 2 years via Freedom of Information requests. The recently established PSNI dedicated hotline to look into our issues is also proven highly unsatisfactory, as some complain of the line being directed to officers' homes and serious delays in callback. Little faith and confidence already exists. We need no more. This is yet more inadequate provision in what some are now portraying as tokenistic and a toothless inquiry. Victim support services we need up and running as of yesterday, not tomorrow. The business plan sits under protracted considerations by this Northern Ireland government as people yearn to turn from victim survivors to thrivers and the truest forms of our real beings. Sign off the victim support services, please. We are not to be treated belatedly by this government as it did with so many elements of the HIA, who had these victim support services implemented in December of last year. Too late for too many. We also respectfully demand that negotiations with all those culpable now end. Time has way passed for appealing to the goodwill and the better nature, the morals and the conscience of those that for too long are determined to drag us kicking and screaming into submission and demoralise us, seize their assets, raid their offices without notice and their archives, remove charitable status and remove their tax exemption. Come down hard, the time is long past. The state, we the people, should not be paying for the entirety of reparations. There is little to no healing without justice. Money does not replace nor equate to deprivation and denial. In the words of Benjamin Franklin, that applies to all of our governors, legislators and political leaders and others. Justice will not be served until those who are unaffected are as outraged as those who are. So we are saying to you, use your outrage, use your humanity, your conscience. Be on the right side of history as we make it. Write your best epitaph and legacy for those coming after us, but more importantly, for those still unserved. Thanks very much. I'll hand over to Paul now.
Hello. I'd like to start by thanking the committee on behalf of myself and members of Truth Recovery NI, and indeed the wider circle of victims and survivors for giving us the opportunity to present evidence today. My name is Paul McClary, and I am part of a victims and survivors group, Truth Recovery NI. Can I start by acknowledging the hard work and persistence over many, many years of all the campaign groups, and in particular birth mothers and their children for justice who are here today, and other individuals who, from a place of silence, have brought about this historic and momentous report with all of its recommendations, which have now been fully endorsed by the Executive. And we welcome the announcement that all the recommendations will be implemented in full, and that is the key word, implementation. And we accept some recommendations require legislation, but I would urge you, keep the pressure on TEO, and those recommendations which do not require legislation can start immediately. Whilst the report is welcome, we also need a fully funded, effective communication strategy to reach out to all those affected. It is imperative that all victims and survivors affected by this scandal know about it and how to engage with the process in full. I would like the committee to press this with the Executive, that there is a fully funded communication strategy to reach out to everyone across all the jurisdictions, wherever they may be across the globe. We also welcome the immediate steps that have been taken to establish the consultative forum. It is vital that victims and survivors continue to remain front and centre in the process until the end. My own story is sadly like too many other stories. But these are not just stories. They're not fiction or penned by an author for dramatic effect. They are real. They are lived experiences that are filled with unbelievable pain, deep-rooted trauma, feelings of unbearable abandonment, grief, and unimaginable heartache. There is no happy ending to these stories, and collectively, they make up the greatest scandal of our time. Page 174 in the Journal for Marionville Mother and Baby Home, Belfast, run by the Good Shepherd nuns, records 7 lines. On the 1st of November 1963, Kathleen Veronica Purcell was admitted 5 months pregnant, and I quote, "Sent here by Miss Gorman, Londonderry Welfare." Sent here. Her mother was a prostitute and is now in Muckamore. Kathleen has lived with her grandmother. She has been working in a factory in Derry since she left school. Gunnar father is a non-Catholic. But those 7 lines don't mention that what we really have here is a young, vulnerable 18-year-old girl whose own mother had her own daughter out of wedlock, a young girl who was raised essentially by her elderly grandmother, a girl who lived in abstract poverty, whose mother was a prostitute and at that time in a mental health hospital, who found herself miles away from home, who had been sent there to Belfast, not Newry, where all the other unmarried mums from Derry were sent. More secrecy on top of secrecy, a complex web of smoke and mirrors, an 18-year-old on her own and 5 months pregnant, carrying her first child. How terrifying was that for her? And when we hear testimony from mothers in these institutions and how they were shamed, they were sinners, unfit mothers, made to scrub floors, heavily pregnant, chastised day after day, effectively brainwashed and convinced hour after hour, day after day, that they couldn't give their babies a good life, the signing of any consent form was a fait accompli. And it kicks in, a well-oiled, slick operation involving family, church and state to save the moral fabric of society, to hide the shame. The shame of what? A young girl, unmarried, gets pregnant, and both the mother and the baby pay the ultimate price, the primal wound, separation for life. And where was the help and advice? Did social services throw an arm of comfort around these vulnerable women and tell them they could keep their babies? There was another way. There was help with social welfare, housing, etc. No, they didn't. They didn't offer that blanket of comfort. The only welfare they were concerned about was keeping the status quo and ensuring that these bastard children were taken from their mother's arms and given to better families. Added to the journal entry, page 174 at a later date, baby boy was born in the City Hospital, Belfast, on the 28th of February 1964. The baby was baptised and called Martin. Miss Gorman took the baby to Derry on the 9th of March. The baby, Martin, was 9 days old. The adoption files state that Martin was received into the care of the committee, that's the Derry Welfare, on the 18th of March 1964, and the consent forms were signed by Kathleen Purcell and dated the 7th of April. So let's take that timeline step by step. Miss Gorman took the baby on the 9th of March. The committee received the child into the care of the welfare on the 18th of March. So where was the baby for 9 days? And how did the committee take receipt of the child when the actual consent wasn't signed until the 7th of April? At best, it is negligent. But the likelihood, and in my view, the reality is much more sinister, because I hear this story from so many babies now, adults, how literally days after they were born, they were gone, taken from their mothers. What's going on here? Did the mothers start to form bonds with their babies? Was there a chance that these mothers would say, no, I'm keeping my baby? After all, at a primal level, if you remove any baby animal from its mother, the pain and trauma is evident to see. They will die to protect their young. Are we as human beings not more intelligent than animals? Why would that maternal instinct to nurture and protect be any less? Kathleen's life eventually spiralled out of control. I firmly believe she never got over having her baby been taken away. She became heavily dependent on alcohol, I imagine to numb the pain, and had 3 more children, none of whom she was able to keep despite her best efforts. That trauma of separation continued each time. What impact did that have on her mental health? There's a CID occurrence book in Tennant Street Police Station, and it has an entry recorded the 4th of February 1975 at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. An anonymous young male reported that a woman had been burnt at number 12 Brookvale Avenue. In attendance, a female was found lying in a blanket with her clothes burnt, with what appeared to be 2nd and 3rd degree burns to her body. The details recorded were Kathleen Purcell, no fixed abode. She was taken to the Royal Victoria Hospital and she died 6 days later as a result of those burns on the 10th of February 1975. She was 29 years old and is buried in a Legion of Mary grave in Milltown Cemetery. That was the inevitable tragic end of the tragic life of that young 18-year-old vulnerable girl who entered Marionville 11 years earlier. I often visit that grave to put flowers on it. Kathleen Veronica Purcell was my mum, and I am her son Martin. I even lost that name because the family I was boarded out to already had a Martin there. That was her favourite saint, and I became Paul. I was taken away from my mother 9 days old and will never see her again. I spent a year in a care home in Derry and was boarded out in March 1965. I was 1 year old and latterly adopted in 1970, age 6. From my earliest memory, I knew I didn't belong in that place where I was and in the family that I was with, not because of the colour of my skin, because those feelings came long before I was aware of racism and ethnic difference. Something was missing. I felt a bond to someone else. I sensed loss. I felt alone. My adopted parents told me they never saw a baby who cried so much. I've heard the same story from many other children, now adults. That feeling of abandonment has shaped my life irreversibly. It never has and never will leave me. Like all the children, now adults, we can't let people in close. Our defence mechanisms kick in to protect us. We are afraid of being hurt. We are afraid of rejection. We are people pleasers who always want to be accepted. I lived with a family, but they were the wrong family. I spent nights banging my head off a wall, crying, hoping she would come back for me. As a young boy, I ran away from home, unprepared. I didn't get too far. I could never call my adopted mother Mum. I simply could not bring myself to say those words to her. On my 18th birthday, I left home. I walked away from that adopted family, from the brothers and sisters. I asked to be cut out of any will. And whilst I totally acknowledge that many others had great relationships with their adopted families, for me, I always felt that blood was thicker than water. I think it's fair to say that I hated my adopted mother. Not because she did anything wrong. In fact, many would argue they gave me shelter and opportunities in life. But for me, it was much deeper than that. She simply was not my mother. Whatever attachment was made during pregnancy and in those few days when I was with my mum after birth, or when she called into the children's home to take me out, whatever happened, whatever words I heard, whatever smile I saw, whatever gentle stroke I received, whatever smell I smelled, whatever it was, that small amount of time and contact with my mother has stayed with me all of my life. So when we, the babies, now adults, hear of the shameful proposals for redress as announced in the ROI last week, we are shocked, horrified and frankly sickened. To say that redress is only open to children who spent more than 6 months in the institution shows a lack of empathy and compassion on a monumental scale. What happened to mothers and those children in those institutions was wrong, and rightly redress is long overdue. But they totally miss the point. They simply don't get it. They do not understand us and take any account of the scientific and medical research which clearly shows the earlier the impact of trauma, the longer the effect. We will not accept in any shape or form redress proposals like this. And if you accept the notion, and in my view you must, that the separation of mother and baby was consent by forced coercion, it was a crime, and length of time in an institution cannot form any part of redress provisions. Totally ignore best practice guidelines in neuroscience, childhood trauma and attachment. It is not and can never be a hierarchy of victims or indeed a cost-saving exercise. The children, now adults' real family identities are based on scraps of paper stored in a box. We continue lifelong journeys of searching to put the early part of our life jigsaw together. We cannot answer a simple but serious question about our family medical history. Are there any hereditary medical conditions? We don't know the answer, and neither do our own children. I received a phone call at lunchtime today from a social worker who is accessing information about my time in the children's home Mourne Drive. The file is massive. She has been working on it for almost 3 months now, and it will take another 2 weeks to write a report for me to view. That information about my first year of life has been sitting in a box in a medical records department for 57 years, like so many other people's records. Can you imagine or understand the pain and anguish that causes us all? I'm sure all of you not affected by this have simply asked your parents at some stage in your life, what was I like as a baby? A simple question that we cannot even have answered. Walk a mile in our shoes to understand us. I would implore the committee to take evidence from specialists in the area of childhood trauma, neuroscience and abandonment to inform everyone on this issue. We need to change the narrative that this only involves time spent in the institution. People need to understand us. The immediate access to records for those living and deceased, because people like me are advocating for myself and my deceased mother, is a key building block in this process. How can we advocate for ourselves? Apologies. How can we advocate for ourselves and our deceased mothers if we don't know that story? I started my presentation by using a quote which Phil Scraton made to the media, the greatest scandal of our time. So let us work together with passion and determination to deliver truth and justice. Sadly, this report and implementation of it will never fully address the pain and trauma people have suffered. There's nothing it can do to take away the pain and trauma. It will remain with every single one of us, always. I cannot take my mummy out of that grave in Milltown Cemetery. I can't hug her. I can't tell her I love her. That moment is gone for me, forever. When I began this search at 21 years old, she was already dead. I found out my real name and applied for my original birth certificate, which duly arrived in the post. There was no early warning trigger that an adopted child was accessing the records, no social worker to advise me on my journey and what I might discover. I was solely focused on meeting my mum, this person who I'd been longing for all my life, and I had no consideration of what else I might find out. Needless to say, the discovery of her death and tragic life, other siblings and relatives had a devastating effect on me as a young man. She would have been 40 on the day I went looking for her. We could have had a life together. Others have reached the pinnacle and found their mothers, but in most cases far, far too late. And rather than having long and enduring relationships with them, they have had a few years at best. Many questions for them, like me, remain unanswered. However, full implementation of this report can go some way to see the delivery of truth, justice and redress. The primal wound of a mother being separated from a baby and the baby being separated from the mother, the denial of human rights was a crime inflicted on all involved, and we must be creative in our thinking, learn from the mistakes others have made in the delivery of truth and justice, and deliver a world-class truth, justice and redress scheme that other jurisdictions in the future can apply when their time comes, and it will come. And they can look at ours and say there is a model that truly delivers truth and justice. Thank you.
Okay. Can I bring Una into the spotlight as well, please?
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Paul and Ewan, for that great speech. And every word that they have said is true. It's kind of basically left me totally speechless, to be quite honest with you, because a lot of the road over a number of years I travelled myself with Ewan, and I'm witness to everything that he has said. Also that there's a lot of, I suppose, evidence that girls have came from all over Ireland, England and beyond to come to Northern Ireland, to Marionville and to the rest of the institutions. It's an absolute disgrace. And I, as a living birth mother, went through every bit of suffering and shame that's been spoke about here today. I've been on my journey for 42 years, and it's not over yet. I have suffered mental health issues. I've suffered physical pain and suffering. My story is that I was a 17-year-old girl who was taken on a journey to a place I never knew existed. I was placed in this institution in Newry. I was told to forget who I was. Put that girl out of your mind. She doesn't exist anymore. I was brought to a small place where I was told I would have to stay like a bedroom. It was actually a dormitory, and it was divided up into sections. There was about 14 girls there at the time, in my time. There was a small curtain at the bottom of the dormitory where I stayed. There was a small bed where I lay my head at night. Most of the time, I never slept anyway, just wondering what was going to happen next. I heard the girls cry next to me all the time, at night mostly. If we heard anything coming down the corridor, it was a nun. And then it was total silence. I didn't know which was the worst, the silence or the crying. This went on for several months that I was in there. It never ended. We went to Mass early in the morning, and we sat at the back of the chapel. Our food was very limited, so therefore our protein for carrying our babies was very little. We lost a lot of weight. We had worked, we cleaned, yes, as the boys have said. We have done all them things. But the most of all was we were made knit and sew and make these boxes up for our babies. Boxes of little things like toys and clothes, cardigans, that we thought we were going to have our babies. We were misled. We were told lies. And when my time came to go in to have my baby, they opened me up and they cut him out of me. Basically, I had a section which I never knew I was going to have. So that wound is a memory for me every day I carry. I look in the mirror and I see what they have told me. That you were a sinner. You were no good. No one wanted you. Your family doesn't want you. You're worthless. And I've never forgot them words the whole of my life. It does nothing but bring you down and totally destroys you. Sometimes I take a brain freeze because I don't know what other direction to go in life. But the way and what I've been through, that's all I can see. It's like a tunnel vision. My family has been affected by me It's a ripple effect. It just doesn't stop with me. It goes on with my children and my children's children, my grandchildren. And I just pray for someday that this will end. I'm absolutely delighted that the recommendations are there. We fought for this day. As I said, I've been on this journey for a very long time. And in 2013, I first made myself known to the government. And I did leave a little letter up the other day, and some of you might have seen it. And because of my age, I did go through the HIA. But unfortunately, I didn't get to Banbridge. And if I had have got to Banbridge, it may have made a difference for other people too. We did meet with Michelle O'Neill and Simon Hamilton whenever he was, first of all, the Department of Health was going to carry out a scoping exercise, and that was in 2015. Michelle O'Neill then took over in October then of 2016. The ministers told us that they agreed to a scoping exercise. We met with Peter McBride, and again, before that, we never met with Nora Gibbons, and sorry to her death. Judith Gillespie we have met, we have worked with, and now the Truth and Recovery panel. What more can we do? What more can we do to get our final justice? Northern Ireland is a shame. We are your people, and we are expecting the government to do its duty by us. Our human rights was taken from us. We had the right to freedom of speech. We had the right freedom from torture and inhumane treatment. But we are still carrying that inhumane treatment with us. It hasn't ended. And our babies are still being treated the same. We're begging for you today, for you, the government, to take this on board and listen to us and appreciate us for who we are, human beings. Take every word of what everybody here today has said, because every word of it is the truth, and all we want is justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Unit. Can I ask Adele Johnson now to come into the spotlight, please?
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I would like to paint you a picture. I was born in 1951 to a single mother who resided in the Mater Dei Sancta Maria Hostel in Belfast. I was adopted in 1953 by an older couple with 3 children of their own. I do home checks for dog rescues all over Ireland to ensure that a dog is placed in a secure, safe and loving environment. But I was placed with this family without even that being done. I have a birth certificate, I have an adoption certificate, but I have no information in between. And no one can tell me where I was during the most crucial time for child development. My adopted parents fed, clothed and educated me, but did not give me the love and support that a child needs to flourish and grow. My adoptive mother constantly told me that I was unadoptable and that my mother was a prostitute. She was also rather fond of corporal punishment. I was a very lonely, unloved child, and at 10 years I fell prey to a paedophile that abused me until I became too old at puberty. After this, my perceptions of love and sex became very confused, and I fell pregnant at 17 to a young man that really didn't care at all what happened to me. When my adopted mother found out, she made arrangements with the parish priest that I should go to Marionvale. I was not consulted about this decision, and I hadn't a clue where my adopted mother and the priest were taking me. I even thought that I might be killed and thrown in a ditch. Such was my terror. I entered Marionvale at 18, and I spent 7 months there. On arrival, I was informed that I could no longer use my name, and I was given the name Bernadette. This was my third name in my short life. Before I was taken to the building where I was going to live, a nun took down the details and gave me forms to sign. I assume now that they were forms to claim benefits. I don't really know. The long building that was Marionvale was a cold, regimented place, hidden away at the back of the main house. Every second of our lives there was closely observed. We went to chapel in the morning, we ate a meagre breakfast, and we started our chores. We scrubbed floors, washed windows, washed clothes and bedding, and hung them outside on lines. Occasionally we were allowed to walk round the grounds, but always supervised. I remember once walking on the main road, 2 by 2. One of my most vivid memories was that we were told to put on a show for the nuns in the main house. I and others had to do Irish dancing for their entertainment. Pregnant girls dancing a jig, outperforming monkeys. Our showers hadn't any doors or curtains, so privacy was non-existent, as we were watched even there. We slept in a dormitory with thin rough sheets and a blanket, listening to the other girls crying themselves to sleep. We were afforded the most basic of health care, no prenatal advice or information. I had high blood pressure, so was moved to a side room at my adoptive parents' expense. Before we attended the hospital, we were told to purchase a wedding ring. Mine came from Woolworths. It fooled no one. In the evening, we were allowed to sit in a common room where we knitted or crocheted small toys and garments for the children that we would never keep. From the day we entered that place, we were told that we were unfit to look after a child, that they were going to parents who would look after them much better than us. We were also told we must atone for our sins, and we had to go to confession regularly to confess to the visiting priest. Drip, drip, drip of shame heaped upon us daily. When it came time for my child to be born, I was induced and left in a delivery suite on my own, frightened out of my wits. I do not wish to go into every detail of my labour, but suffice to say, I needed a lot of stitches, and this was done in a rough and caring way. I remained in hospital for 4 days and returned to Marionvale with my child. Before long, I was back to the dormitory and back to chores. We were given very little advice or guidance with regards to childcare, and we picked it up from each other, sometimes teaching each other things that were not good for a healthy, tiny baby. For example, shaking to get the wind up. I still have nightmares about that. We were allowed into the nursery to feed and change our babies for about 15 to 20 minutes and had to follow a strict routine of feeding. The only time we could spend a little longer was the nighttime feeds because the nuns would not get up at night. Eventually, I was told that an adoption had been arranged, but it fell through, and I was sent to clean the large detached house next door. I think at this stage my maternity allowance had run out, and I had to earn mine and my son's keep. It was hard work, and the people used to leave coins all over the place. Maybe they thought I would steal them, but I used to put them into neat little piles and place them back again. The time came that another adoption was arranged, and I was told the night before, so I found some paper and a pencil. I wrote a little note to my child telling him that I loved him, but I had no choice but to surrender him I hid it at the bottom of a bag, filled with the things that I had made for him and a small toy that I had managed to buy on one of my hospital visits. The next morning I went to the nursery, dressed my child, wrapped him in a shawl, walked up the corridor and handed him to a nun. She turned her back on me and walked away, and I never seen my child for 40 years. I packed up my meagre belongings and left Marion the same day, and I returned to my adoptive parents. But I didn't stay long. I went to another place to try and pick up my life, and that's when I changed my name for the final time. My name is Adele. I eventually married and had 2 more children, but I never forgot my firstborn. I've lived a life of lies, shame, and gut-wrenching pain. I've never been able to fill that huge hole inside me. I know now that I was deeply traumatised from the events throughout my life, and only now that I've been reunited with my son and sought out counselling and my healing. I joined Birth Mothers and Their Children for Justice about 10 years ago and worked very much in the background. But gradually I found my voice. We have been on a really long, hard journey, but now we have been finally acknowledged by the Truth and Recovery panel. Going forward, we need the recommendations from the Truth and Recovery panel to be fully implemented as soon as possible. Everything that can be put in place without needing legislation needs to be done now. Funding for the VSS services needs to be signed off, as we are hearing from our members of the extensive physical and mental health issues they are suffering, and they require access to counselling and other support services urgently. Our members have been punished for being pregnant out of wedlock. Our children have suffered separation from us and have feelings of abandonment, of always been different, and we all carry the twin badges of shame and stigma. We speak for a large group of victims and survivors, including many who are so traumatised and do not appear on our Facebook pages or can hear their voice or their voices be heard. We require safeguarding for these victims and survivors moving on in this process. We need legislation to be in draft to lead to our statutory inquiry before very long. The Victim Survivors Forum needs to be established with an independent chairperson as soon as possible so that we can all work together. The Survivors Forum needs to be established. Oh, sorry, I've read that before. We were extremely concerned about the lack of communication and that there was no go-to person for information of updates. We heard that this has been addressed, so we need to be in contact with this person immediately. The Truth Recovery panel stated that the independent panel should be set up within 6 months. We want the process to establish this to be put into motion immediately. The length of time that women and children spent in these institutions should have no bearing on redress. Some babies were removed from the hospital immediately after birth. Redress should never have any impact on benefits or tax liability. And we really want an early interim payment to be paid without delay, as a lot of our members are in advanced years with multiple health issues. In the event of death of the victim and the survivor, we would like redress to go to the next of kin. Funding is also required to enable all victims and survivors to seek and obtain legal advice and representation in any court or investigation. There must be no age restriction on any girl that has entered these institutions, and all institutions must be included. Children that were fostered, boarded out, or placed in a children's home must also be included. And we also need governments on both sides of the border and further afield to cooperate with reference to the trafficking of women and children across multiple jurisdictions. We need full access to victims and survivors' records immediately without putting them through hoops. We need access to information so that we can can participate fully in any further investigations. We need the legislation relating to the preservation of all relevant records to be drafted immediately. This should also cover state, non-state institutions, officials, agencies, representatives and professionals that facilitated these institutions. Social workers need to review their code of conduct. We have many instances of people using GDPR in the improper way. They need to stop treating us like children. We are not children, we are adults. Investigation of the whereabouts of missing children and women must also be looked at on the death records. Last night I read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, all 30 of them, and the institutions and their facilitators violated practically every one of them. So thank you for your time, everyone, and if you have any questions, we will endeavour to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewan, Paul, Una and Adele. That was a very powerful and emotional testimony and witness today. And this is Ireland's shame. And the chair of the panel, the expert panel, he said it's the greatest scandal of our time, and I believe he's absolutely right. But we are running out of time. You know, we have to address these issues and we have to address them with urgency. And I think you've given us a very powerful insight and very powerful motivation for us to do this job and to do it right. Can I say that the government has made the statement, the Deputy First Minister has accepted the 5 recommendations and all the sub-recommendations. And that is a really powerful step forward, because now it has to move on to delivery of those recommendations. And also these recommendations are very, very unique in the context of truth and recovery, because they're integrated. This is an integrated system where you can have an expert independent panel seeking truth and seeking information, and parallel to that, a statutory public inquiry. So we don't have to wait on the legislative process. We can actually move forward with urgency and start delivering on truth and justice and accountability. And there should be no hiding places for any institution or any person that has done the deeds to either mothers or babies in this state, north or south. And there should be no way that they can hide their financial richness either in relation to redress. But we haven't covered ourselves in glory in past in dealing with institutional abuse here in Northern Ireland. We've been slow. We too have dragged our feet. And we have got a piece of work to do, and we can learn from the failures that we have in the Historical Institute of Abuse. They have been waiting for almost 5 years now on an apology from this executive. So we have to ensure, this committee has to ensure due process and scrutiny. We have to ensure that the department puts together a framework and a delivery plan in order to deliver the recommendations as stated. You deserve no less from a state that has failed you. I'm sorry, I'm really emotional about this, and forgive me, because I just hope each one of you that have delivered your testimony today have family behind you that can give you the hug that I would love to give you here today, because you deserve that. And I'm going to hand over to John Stewart, if he could ask some of the questions. Open up the questions, please.
Thank you, Sinead, thank you. And it is deeply emotional, and I just want to echo the words that you've passed on to the presenters here today. To all four of you, thank you so much for your courage and the dedication you've shown, both in your campaigning and your dedication to this cause over many years, and the work that you have done. I know I met with all of you over the last couple of days and weeks, and I've been just taken back by the how long you've been campaigning and helping others on this issue as well, and it is honestly just credit to each of you. There's a number of aspects I want to go into before opening it to the floor, and I'm just conscious of other people's time, so I don't want to speak for too long. But whenever you were speaking, Adele, at the end, you talked about the need for communication, and we always hear about a victim-centred process, and that's sort of one of those terms that nobody really knows what it means in terms of actually the detail of something like that. So, it's a sort of term we throw around, but I think key to that, and hopefully you'll agree, is communication. And I'm interested to hear how you think that should manifest itself. Is it the need for all victims who subscribe to your newsletter to get regular updates, or should it be campaign groups to be fed information on a daily basis from the forum, for example, or should it be a cocktail of everything? What do you think is the key to that, to keep people informed, for openness and transparency, and to make sure that all victims and those involved and all stakeholders are making sure they're completely up to date with the information and the processes that are underway?
I actually think a cocktail of all would work very well. Maybe a newsletter sent out to all the email addresses, or even to the group, to be passed on to the members, and a go-to person to be assigned. I think this already has been addressed, that if we do have a query or something we're worried about or something we're not happy about, that we can contact that one person without going all around the houses to try and find somebody. Hope that answers your question.
No, yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah, thanks. Folks, does anybody else have an input in that in terms of the process, or Paul? Yeah, Ewan? I don't know if you're on mute or else. That's maybe.
Am I on mute? Is it me? Am I speaking now? It's hard to know. Okay.
Paul's in back. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, John, I would just add, and I mean at the point I made in my presentation, and there's two things. I think we need to understand and have a full list of every single institution that is going to be involved, and we're not clear on what that is at this stage. And if we as victims and survivors across the various groups identify places that we believe should be included, we need to be able to advocate that case. But the key thing that I was trying to get across at the start of my presentation was there needs to be fully funded communication strategy to reach out to people in the first instance, to let them know what work has been done and how they engage with that. I think in the Republic of Ireland, they sent letters out to every single household so that people weren't getting a letter, personally addressed, or there was things that were done. But when the Truth Recovery, Phil, Maeve and Deirdre did their work, I understand up to 500 people engaged. Yes, there was a digital platform, and I think there might have been a box of posters that arrived at some stage and a few people threw up. But digital platforms are great for young people. A lot of people here are of an older generation, and we have to reach, a global audience here. So for me, that's the key thing. You need to tell people what's happening to get them to engage in the process.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a point that we hear time and time again. And you've all mentioned about how, for many victims have been brave enough to come forward, and particularly through the work of representative bodies and campaigning groups, to be able to have that show somebody to support them through this. But many have also not been able to come forward through whatever reason. Is there any indication how many people could potentially have been affected as a victim by these institutions, whether it be birth mothers or or their children? Is there a figure or a rough estimate on that at this stage?
John, it's sorry, I can answer that. It's very difficult to impossible to gauge how many people's affected here. I mean, the Northern Ireland researchers, given that, I mean, we have to remember the access to records they had was a snapshot. So there was a limited number of institutions, and they had limited access to the records that are officially being kept, and we don't even know how many records they actually got access to because they had to sign a number of non-disclosure agreements, etc., etc. But they had said 10,500 women had through the mother and baby institutions, and around 3 through the laundries. This doesn't include the workhouses, of course, and you're talking about potentially tens of thousands of people there from 1922 to 1948 till the workhouses closed. But the problem is that no matter how many records and files you're going to get looking at, they're official records and they're inaccurate, and you'll never ever get a proper account of how many people are affected, because we've seen records where a number of adopted people and birth mothers have not been recorded in books, whether they're baptism registers or parish registries, and yet we know for an absolute fact that we're in these institutions. So that's part of the reason why we need the VSS services, because we have obviously asked for DNA testing to be provided by the state, because, as I say, some people aren't even aware of these circumstances, whether they're adopted, fostered, boarded out, whatever the case may be. And unfortunately, DNA will be the only way that some of these people will get an attachment or a reunion of some kind. And the unfortunate thing is that because of all the illegality, the falsification of certificates, etc., I mean, people like yourselves could actually be affected by these institutions and you not know it. Yeah. And that means because you've seen a birth certificate doesn't mean that it's genuine and legitimate, because it could have been falsified and it could have been forged. Such is the extent of the criminality and the falsification of records here. So it's, in terms of the amount of people that came forward, it's unfortunately only been about 500 people. But to add on to what Paul said there, unfortunately no process yet, either North and South, has done enough to outreach to people across different jurisdictions in different countries. And that minimises the amount of people that will not only know about the ongoing processes, but will not be able to apply to the redress schemes. Now, the cynical amongst us would say that's deliberate, contrived government strategy to do that, to minimise costs to the public purse. But the point is, people like ourselves are outreaching to people. People are finding out by accident, sometimes on social media, and they're saying, oh, I didn't know this had happened. I know so many people that should have applied to the redress schemes in the south of Ireland, because people forget what happens in the south and happens in the north affects both jurisdictions, and on a wider geographical basis as well. It's absolutely imperative that the government does its utmost to outreach across the nations. This has to be intergovernmental. People talking to the governments of both states, putting out these newsletters, etc., etc. You cannot single them out or exclude anybody. Paul's absolutely right, because in the Commission in the South, before it delivered its report, it was cold calling a lot of people that had given their testimonies. Cold calling people, jeopardising their private and their secretive and their confidential status. Cold calling them at home to ask them if they wanted to anonymise their testimonies in the Commission. And there was cold calling carried out by the Northern Ireland researchers up here as well. They were given a list and people didn't know they were going to be rang. Again, potentially jeopardising their circumstances. Yeah.
That point about data sharing is one I made last week, and I think some of you were tuned in for that, about the essentialness of having data sharing between the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland governments to make sure that there can be no miss in that. Una, do you want to come in that? Sorry, I see your hand up.
My mic. I just want to come in there, too. We also have migrant children that are in America, Canada, and beyond, that don't even know, as Ewan said, that don't even know they're possibly adopted, that were taken from their mothers from birth, and their mothers were told that the children were dead. These, as I say, we're looking for graves. We don't even know who's in these graves. And we do actually know of one that's up in Upper Kaliva. And this grave is 16 foot by 8. There's 3 tokens of gesture that are on it, and the Good Shepherd Convent is on it. So it's witness to that the grave belongs to them. But we don't know what's in that grave. We're told by, he was an ex-priest and he is a caretaker of the graveyard. And we were told that he had no record of who was in the grave. I mean, that's ridiculous. You know, this is, you know, we're your people and we need these things opened up. And we have seen records of girls from all over Ireland. And as I said, migrant women, migrant children. Girls were told to leave the mother and baby homes. They were given a fee of a couple of pounds and told to go away, shipped off to England or shipped off to further afield. And be quiet. Live your life, the rest of your life, in silence.
Yeah. No,
and that's what most of them done.
Yeah, it's absolutely, like, it's horrific, dreadful what happened, and I'm fully supportive of that, and I'd like to think that I speak for everyone in the committee, and in fact I'm sure I do, and they'll probably come in and say this, that no stone can be left unturned in that quest for information. Every possible avenue must be allowed to be opened so that the pursuit of truth in this can be opened, and every institution involved must be held to full account. Folks, I could question all day. I will probably contact you directly with some more of the questions, but I'm conscious of time and other members wanting to come in. So what I'm going to do is thank you very much again for coming along today and for everything that you continue to do. And you have my complete support, and my door is always open, and feel free to call or get in touch anytime. I'll hand back to the chair, to Sinead, if it's okay, and because she can bring in other members, because I can't do it without being the host. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, John, thank you for jumping in there. I just got a bit overwhelmed with it all, to be honest. And I think you've raised a really good point, and Paul and Ewan raised it as well. It's about unmarked graves and how do we secure those graves and the contents of those graves to find out just information that is required for the Truth Recovery Panel as well. And time is running out for that, and I know even within my own constituency, planning requests for housing in areas that we suspect that there remains of babies because of mother and babies' homes quite nearby, and it was really originally within the ownership of the Good Shepherd's Convent. So time is of the essence, and a great deal has to be done. I am going to now, I see lots of hands raised here. I'm going to ask Emma Sheeran to come into the spotlight.
Thank you, Chair. And just, I suppose, at the outset, I want to thank all the presenters for the presentation today. I don't think you could listen to that without being moved. And thank you for the work that you have done, both on your own behalfs, the behalfs of your relatives, and on everyone impacted by this. I mean, the Chair said at the outset, this is Ireland's shame, and there's absolutely no doubt about this. We have a history in this country of religious orders imposing misogyny and secrecy and shame and plainly human rights abuses, and that's what this amounted to. So just to thank you for your testimony and to say that we're listening to you. I suppose from a Sinn Féin perspective, I want to give the commitment that obviously the TEO have already outlined that they're implementing the recommendations from the panel, and I know that the 26 county government, and we had a presentation from the Truth Recovery Panel last week and had asked about the learnings that they had from the mistakes that were made by the Dublin government. And I know that my party colleague Kathleen Function has tabled a motion in the 26 counties around some of the issues with their scheme, particularly the 6 month time criteria and how offensive that is, and the fact that it isn't trauma informed and doesn't recognise that regardless if a person only spent a day in one of these institutions, it's had knock-on implications for both themselves and everybody belonging to them. So just to give you assurance that from my perspective and from our party's perspective, we want to listen to what you're saying and take the recommendations on board and ensure that everything that we do is victim-centred and is in line with what you're recommending, because if we're going to right the wrongs of the past and ensure that these things are consigned to history fully, we need proper truth recovery and we need to listen to the experiences of those impacted. So just to thank you for sharing and to send my
solidarity to you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
Can I bring in Trevor Lunn, please, as well, please, for questioning?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm afraid if I had been asked to speak 20 minutes ago, I would have been absolutely speechless, because I have 15 years up here. I've never heard such powerful testimony about any subject, and I knew about a lot of this, obviously, but to hear it from those affected, it's the only way to really understand or try to understand what happened. I think a number of years ago we had a debate here about the specific issue of the Bon Secours home in Tuam. I remember Barry McElduff, who's gone from us now, brought a debate, and it was emotional enough, but I don't know, I've never heard anything like what you folk have just told us today, even having been aware of some of it. And I can see the effect it's had on other members, and I'm not one bit surprised. I have no questions for you, but I do hope that we can play our part and do what we can in a meaningful way to bring these issues forward, to try and accelerate the process that hopefully has now begun, and to take on board all the suggestions that you have made, all four of you. I can only say thank you. I feel ashamed and inadequate today, and I just hope we can remedy some of this. But thank you for your attendance. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Can I bring Diane Dodds into the spotlight, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And again, like other members of the committee, my sincere thank you. This is indeed probably, I think it was members of the panel last week who were saying that this is such a shameful, terrible part of the history of this place. And your testimony and your stories today reflect that. And I suppose really this is a scrutiny committee of the First and Deputy First Minister's office, and they have taken on the role of implementing the recommendations of this inquiry. So it will be up to the members of this committee to scrutinise and to make sure that the implementation of the inquiry recommendations are done faithfully and done well and done as speedily as we can get it done. So therefore, the role for us is to scrutinise that. And I think every one of us here in the committee today will, I suppose, with renewed vigour, continue to scrutinise the actions of the First and Deputy First Minister and how they get this thing going. You've indicated a couple of things that I think are really, really important. One is whatever doesn't need legislation should probably get going as quickly as possible. There are no wins in this situation, but we can alleviate some pain by getting some of those recommendations done as quickly as possible. And perhaps, Chair, that might be an inquiry that we do make to the Executive Office. Is there an intention to try to get some of the recommendations that do not need legislation out there as quickly as possible as we possibly can do it? and that would be very important. You talk about the data sharing, you talk about unnamed and unmarked graves, and I have met with some of those people who have been doing the research into this particular aspect of it, and it is absolutely harrowing to hear the stories that they tell in relation to that. I suppose really in closing, I want to say that we need to keep up the communication. And I know the Chair knows that this is an important issue and feels that this is an important issue. And I would really like this committee to keep up that level of communication so that we are hearing from you about whether or not you feel that this is being implemented in a way that works for you, that is sympathetic to you, that is sensitive to the issues that you have expressed today. But above all, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Anne, for that. And finally, Pádraig, over to you.
I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for your bravery in coming on to tell us. And I mean, it's, as Trevor said, it's so hard to kind of put into words, you know, what we want to do and what we will do to help you, you know, in anything. And I think particularly around co-designing and making sure that your input is first and foremost, because it's your voices that are the most important in making sure that it's done right. And I know that, you know, implementing the recommendations, it won't take away that pain, it won't take away the hurt, the trauma, the loss that you've suffered, but hopefully it will be a positive step to ensure that, you know, history doesn't forget the harm that these institutions have done to women, to girls, and to obviously children as well. You know, so I had been in communication with Linda Dillon there as well during it, because I know she had been doing a bit of work. So just wanted to clarify with you that Linda is actually working on an amendment to the adoption bill that will criminalise institutions who destroy records and put an obligation on the institutions to preserve these records. So I just wanted to let you know that I had been aware she'd been working on it, and obviously Kathleen Function is working on that in the south as well. But again, just to thank you, and I suppose probably Paul and Una, what you were saying about, you know, that it's not just yourselves, but it's your families as well, and that's probably something that stuck with me and definitely jumped out at me. That kind of transgenerational impact. So look, we want to make sure that the insult that is what happened in the south will not happen here. So we will work with and take our lead very much from you, and thanks again for coming on.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. I just want to close off here and say thank you once again to all four of you that so powerfully give testament to the atrocities that have scarred your lives and the lives of your families and your grandchildren. As you say, it's intergenerational pain that has occurred here, and I will give your commitment on behalf of this committee that we will do our job in due process, and we will scrutinise the work of the Executive Office, and we will be pushing them with the urgency and the time requirement that you need to get these recommendations fulfilled. And there are areas now at the moment that I would expect the Executive Office to be working on. They will need to be working on the structure, the resources, you know, the significant lead people within the department, perhaps even a subdivisional within the department. These are complex issues, and they require, you know, in many aspects as well, maybe a cross-departmental response. So just who that appointee is within the department, who is the lead person there, what forms of communication are going to be set up so that you are not communicated to, you're communicated with and we don't want to visit the past poor communication that we've had with the victims of the Historical Institute of Abuse, because that has been poor at best, and we don't want to see that going forward. So there are some very, very important first moves that need to be made by the Executive Office. Officials from the department are coming to brief this committee in January. We are hoping by then that we will have some format of framework and structure and communication processes in place that will give you confidence that we're moving on towards delivery of these recommendations. But from the bottom of my heart, and you know, for all the victims that are at home, maybe quietly cheering you along today because you're telling their story as well as your own, I want to thank you. Okay, and now it's over to us and to the Executive Office to make sure that we do you justice and that your truth is told. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sinead.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And everybody, thanks.
Thank you. Bye now.
Okay, members, I nearly want to apologise to you because I was a bit emotional there, but I don't think any of us couldn't have been moved with what we've heard. And I do think that there is a real responsibility, obviously, with the Executive Office and the First Minister and Deputy First Minister to deliver on the full implementation of this report. It is a very unique recommendations in there because there's a two-way process, but one of them can be started almost immediately, and I would suspect that the department are moving on setting up some of the structures that are required. The consultative forum, who's going to be in the consultative forum, you know, what experts are they looking for? There was Union talked about, you know, the childhood trauma experts. There's a whole raft of experts out there that could possibly support some of those you know, forums that we're looking at, and the independent expert panel, and I would be looking at first moves. Also the statement in relation to the business case that is sitting waiting to be passed in relation to the Victims and Survivors Support Scheme. I believe that you know, is also a first move, a significant first move to move that into a reality. We don't want to happen what happened in Historical Institute of Abuse, where they had to wait, you know, a significant amount of time in order to get support services, particularly when an inquiry is going on, because it's re-traumatising, it's re-triggering the abuse that they have gone through and reliving it. They do need supports, systems and the provision of some services in order to move forward, and the sooner the better. Some of these people, you know, are in their later years. They can't wait for 2 or 3 years. They can't wait, you know, with the Historical Institute of Abuse, like this assembly and the executive went down for 3 years and nothing happened. We can't do this on another you know, raft of victims and survivors. We've got to see this through, and we've got to see it through quickly. So we will be looking for, you know, a breakdown of just exactly what is happening. And I would urge the Executive Office, a communication at every step of the way is key. It takes away the anxiety for the victims and survivors, and it's fundamental to securing, you know, that feeling among everybody that we're moving in the right direction, and they know that outcomes and milestones are being achieved. So thank you very much for everybody, and that I'm sure it hasn't been easy for any of you either. So can I move, or is everybody happy enough with those actions that I've indicated? Yeah? Yep. Okay. Right, moving on to item number 8, the Forward Work Programme. Can I refer members to pages 48 to 54 of the meeting pack for the Forward Work Programme for December 2021? And can I remind members that the visit to the Maze Long Cache is taking place tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. There are, in pages 3 to 26 of the table pack, there's relevant papers in relation to the visit. We've had some apologies from some members that can't make it, but for those of us, we're all visiting Trevor Lunn tomorrow in his constituency. So we're all doing a big visit to Trevor tomorrow.
You're coming to my house from
Yes, we'll come to your house. So can I inform members of a meeting with the European Commission Vice President Markus Sefcovic has been scheduled for next week's meeting on the 1st of December. He has an hour to spend with us at 4:30. So that'll be interesting to have him join us virtually. Also, Lord Frost has also indicated that he will meet with us, and he is scheduled to meet with us on Wednesday the 19th of January at 2 p.m. So if you're content, members, to note the remainder of the forward work programme. Okay, members, item number 9 on our agenda. There are 15 items of correspondence, pages 55 to 141 in the meeting pack. 8.1 or 9.1, sorry, is British Irish Council, the 36th British Irish Council Summit Communique of the 19th of November. 8.2 is the First Minister and Deputy First Minister response to the Historical Institute abuse recommendations to the Hart Inquiry. It's 9.3, First Minister and Deputy First Minister ministerial statement on the 15th of November, the Truth Recovery Design Panel. 9.4 is a letter from Mark H. Durgan, MLA, regarding his response to the NDA commitment for additional funding to support Dairy Addiction Centre. I just want to bring the committee's attention to the scale of the mental health crisis that we have in Derry and why that is so important. The PSNI reported to us last month that they responded to 90 incidences where people had gone to the bridge to commit suicide. They had responded to 90. So that's how significant the mental health issues are, and that commitment in the NDA is extremely important. And just on that, I raised the NDA commitments last week at a committee as well. If members were in agreement, I would like to write to the department for an update on the NDA commitments in totality. You know, what is the action plan, for example, of each of the details? What is the action in each of the commitments made? Who is responsible? And progress on those commitments. We don't hear very much about how it is all progressing. So maybe now is an opportune moment to get an idea of how the commitments are progressing, if members are happy enough.
Yes.
Okay. So 8.5, the Executive Office response for finance, again, NDA, unique circumstances funding. 8.6, the Executive Office Victims and Survivors Services Board, appointment of new members. Members' correspondence has been carried over to this from last week's meeting pack due to quorum issues towards the end of last week's meeting. So can I seek your agreement to write to the department to ask for the terms of references in relation to these appointments? Yeah. Okay. The Executive Office response is the next area of correspondence, and it is about the Historical Institute of Abuse and the redress review process. Item 9.8 is the Executive Office High Street Task Force, a call for evidence. And can I just remind members that the committee agreed to forward the official report from the evidence sessions on the High Street Task Force on the 3rd and the 3rd of March and the 16th of June. Item of correspondence 9.9, Committee for the Economy, Customs Declaration Services. If members are happy, I propose that we write to the Executive Office to request an update on its representations in relation to the Customs Declaration Services. Is that okay? 9.10, Committee for the Economy COVID Task Force, ventilation of high-risk settings. I already mentioned that in my chair's briefing. And if members are happy, I propose that we write to the department to ask whether the COVID Task Force is considering providing grants for ventilation in high-risk settings. We have indications that this has taken place in Scotland, and just want to see what the considerations are being made within the Executive Office. Item of correspondence 9.11 was a lovely little report on the Youth Assembly that took place here last Saturday and the establishment of the Youth Assembly Committee. Just to inform members, one of the Youth Assembly priorities is for a Committee of Rights and Equality, and this committee looks forward to hearing from them in due course. That'll be a breath of fresh air. So, item number 9.12, the Commissioner for Survivors of Institutional Childhood Abuse. Again, I mentioned that in Chair's business and inviting the Commissioner to brief us on her recommendations. Item number 9.13, Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, an invitation to the launch of the 2021 annual Human Rights Statement. And then 9.14 is Queen's University Belfast. It's a green paper highlighting the key issues and solutions in relation to poor productivity in Northern Ireland. And once again, the sub-regional disparities, which were quite were quite remarkable in that green paper. In fact, I wrote a piece for the Dairy Journal in that, but that's neither here nor there. So, and then item 9.15, Foyle International support for English language teaching sector in Northern Ireland. Look, members, can I suggest that unlike for travel agents, this department had not administered a scheme for the language schools, so this request does not fall within the remit of this committee. So if I can seek your agreement to forward this correspondence to the Committee for the Economy.
Yep.
Okay. So if members are happy enough, are you content to note the rest of the correspondence?
Yes.
Okay. And item number 10, any other business? Is there any other business that members would like to raise? Okay. Item number 11, the date and time and place of the next meeting. The next meeting is scheduled to take place next Wednesday, the 1st of December at 2 p.m. in room 30. And just before we do adjourn, we obviously have an hour with Marcus Sekovich. Please, members, try and think of maybe a concise question that we need to ask him, because we won't have an awful lot of time for questioning. So if we can just, maybe think of one question, and if we have time, then we can go around, because I'm really, really conscious of making sure that everybody gets an opportunity and we don't monopolise his time in any way. And I try, as chair, to not confine people in their questioning, and I think it's the right thing to do if we have time, but unfortunately next week we won't have time. So let's think of something that we might want clarity on from the Deputy Commissioner. Okay, thank you very much, and that is the close of the meeting.
Northern Ireland Assembly.